Good afternoon again. If everyone could grab a seat, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you. My name is Lauren Boytel. I'm the Executive Director of ConveneNV. Thank you all for being here and supporting our annual Sustainability Summit, ConveneNV. So nice to be back in person after a 2-year hiatus. As it has been 2 years, I wanted to take a couple minutes to share what we've been up to. The start of the pandemic was as scary for us as it was for many, and things were shaky for a while. But we used the time wisely, took advantage of things like the PPP loan and some generous and understanding funders who were able to be flexible with annual grants. Due to that, we were able to focus on strengthening the organization internally through expanding our funding sources, growing and diversifying our board, and increasing our program offerings. Particularly in the environmental area with an EPA Environmental Justice Collaborative Grant to do air quality monitoring and improvement in East Las Vegas. And we just launched a statewide 100,000 tree, 10-year tree planting project as well. We've also continued our social sustainability prioritization through creating the Southern Nevada Blue Ribbon Panel on Social Equity and the first ever Nevada Policy Council on Human Trafficking. It's been a difficult couple of years, but we've come out stronger, and I'm extremely proud of my staff and board members for their dedication, commitment, and true engagement, so thank you to all of you. There's more information about our programming in the annual reports at your seats, and you can feel free to talk to any of the board members at the ConveneNV table as well to continue the conversation. We also have 2 staff here from Partners for a Sustainable Nevada. It's a collaborative effort led by NDEP, the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection, and they're launching several sustainability projects as well. There's a page about them in the back of the program. So if you're interested in getting involved, please speak to us at ConveneNV or to Partners for a Sustainable Nevada. But today we're here for our signature program, which is ConveneNV. We're trying to make this a zero waste event, so everything will be recycled and any food waste from the reception will be reclaimed. Speaking of, let's bring up our sponsor from Caesars Entertainment, also a co-founding organization of ConveneNV. Please help me welcome Heather Rapp, Senior Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility at Caesars Entertainment.
Thank you, Lauren, and good afternoon. As Lauren said, my name is Heather Rapp. I'm the Senior Vice President with Caesars Entertainment. We're so pleased to be hosting you all this afternoon for our ConveneNV's 2022 ConveneNV event, and to have the opportunity to bring together so many thought leaders to address the many social, economic, and environmental sustainability issues that face us today. We recognize that ConveneNV has filled a gap in the sustainability landscape here in Southern Nevada from its very early days, and we're proud of our longtime support of their work. Not only have we been honored to host ConveneNV in past years, this year during Human Trafficking Awareness Month, we also had the opportunity to fund and host a focus group on the demand reduction in collaboration with ConveneNV. Caesars is also a founding sponsor of the Shared Future Strategy, which we know will be critical to addressing the needs of our most valuable communities here in Nevada. In past years, we've also supported the launch of the Immigration Integration Toolkit and the Social Equity Blue Ribbon Panel. Caesars and ConveneNV have been great partners over the years when it comes to addressing the triple bottom line, or as our own CSR framework outlines, people, planet, play. Under people, for example, we understand the importance of reinvesting in the communities where we operate, which is why we consistently outperform other corporations, currently over 3 times the average community contribution. To address our second pillar, planet, we focus on conserving energy, water, and other resources and have set an ambitious enterprise-wide goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. Play is all about our focus on creating extraordinary experiences for our guests and doing so responsibly. We are the first gaming company to establish a responsible gaming program and are proud of the continued evolution of that program and have embedded the responsible gaming culture across our enterprise. ConveneNV brings unique value for us as a convener and coalition builder in this space, and we're grateful for this opportunity to work with them on the key economic, social, and environmental sustainability efforts that affect our community. Caesars Entertainment is incredibly proud to be a sponsor of Impact NV and the ConveneNV Summit. Thank you all for being here in support of this incredible organization and its goals for a sustainable Nevada. Enjoy the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather and Caesars Entertainment, for your dedication to sustainability leadership and your long-term support of the organization in this event. I want to also thank NV Energy and MGM for your sponsorship and support of ConveneNV as well. One thing I forgot to mention is parking passes. I don't know if they told you at reception, but when you leave, please turn in your badge. We're going to recycle them, and you will get a sticker that you can just scan on your way out for parking, okay? Forgot to mention that housekeeping. Okay, let's start the program. When the board and planning committee were initially discussing the program for today, we realized we needed to find one person who could really understand the triple bottom line of sustainability and connect the dots for our audience between all the panel discussions so that we can see the true interconnectedness and importance of all these issues we will be discussing today and why they are all necessary for the development and success of our state. The first person who came to mind is Senator Chris Brooks. His style, diverse background, and high-level understanding mixed with detailed knowledge of the inner workings of the state made him the perfect choice, and luckily he said yes. So we're so happy to have him. Please help me welcome Senator Chris Brooks, our MC for the day.
Good afternoon, and welcome to ConveneNV 2022. Building on our sustainability movement. I really want to recognize and thank the board of Impact Nevada, as well as the staff of Impact Nevada, especially Lauren Boytel, who has done such an amazing job with the organization, but also with this event this afternoon. I would also like to thank Caesars Entertainment, MGM Resorts, and NV Energy for your generous sponsorship and support of this event and of Impact Nevada. I am Senator Chris Brooks. I represent Nevada Senate District 3. I was born and raised in Las Vegas, and my great-grandparents lived in Nevada. My grandparents, my grandfathers lived in Nevada, and my grandmothers still do. My parents live in Nevada. My siblings live in Nevada. My children and grandchildren all live in Nevada. And I have 4 generations of my family, including myself, have all attended Clark County's public school system. And all of my children have attended Nevada's universities. I've owned and operated successful businesses in our state, including one of the first solar electric, utility-scale solar electric companies in the country. And I located that right here in southern Nevada. I went on to develop or build many of the largest renewable and energy storage systems and projects across the country, but all of them located right here in our state. All of this gives me a unique perspective on our community, but nothing has given me as much of a perspective on our community as serving in the Nevada legislature these past almost 6 years. I've served 3 regular sessions, 3 special sessions, dozens of interim committees, including, I think, over 30 interim finance committees. I was chair of the Senate Finance Committee, and I am chair of the interim finance committee, all during a pandemic, an total economic collapse, and the fragile recovery that we currently are in. And did I mention that my wife was the governor's chief of staff of Nevada during the most trying times our state has ever seen. And what a wild ride it has been for all of us, my family included. And so so many Nevadans in this room, in our families, in our community, so many Nevadans have sacrificed so much in the last few years. So I just want to take this moment so that we can all kind of recognize that and I think that we should think about the resiliency and sustainability of our community, that we are sitting here today. And please just give yourselves a round of applause, as well as all other Nevadans, that we survived and we're still here. This afternoon, we are going to discuss how we can build upon our sustainability momentum. We will look at 3 areas: social sustainability, economic sustainability, and environmental sustainability. We will hear from 2 amazing speakers, my friend, our state's treasurer, Zach Conine, and we'll also hear from one of the most prominent leaders in our community and an subject matter expert in this space, Jan Jones-Blackhurst. In addition to our speakers today, we are going to have 3 distinguished and knowledgeable panels that are going to discuss those 3 areas of sustainability this afternoon. I think framing the conversation we are about to have this afternoon can be very helpful. We will talk a lot about sustainability and resiliency, 2 words that are used a lot and have different meanings to different people. The accepted definitions of these words are a good foundation for where we can start. Now, when we think about sustainability, we all think about it a lot of folks in this room anyway, from a renewable standpoint, a renewable energy standpoint, and the environment. But today I want you to think about sustainability, the definition of sustainability that goes like this: the ability to be maintained at a certain rate or level. The ability to be maintained at a certain rate or level. And when we talk about resiliency, I want you to think about this definition: an ability to recover from or adjust to easily to adversity or change. We'll also talk about building upon our momentum. And I think it's helpful to think of some of the synonyms for momentum: motion, force, velocity, impetus, thrust, drive, and my personal favorite, energy. And sustainability and resiliency are 2 of the biggest issues that we face both in the public sector but in the private sector. But they also, in my opinion, offer the greatest opportunities. I've spent my entire career trying to identify obstacles and then trying to turn those obstacles into opportunities and then capitalizing on those opportunities to the value of Nevadans. As we engage in this conversation this afternoon and later tonight with our friends afterwards over some cocktails, when the real conversations start taking place, let's think of what obstacles face us and how we can turn those into opportunities. Let us try to recognize where we personally or within the organizations that we work with or that we represent, where we have made progress on sustainability, on resiliency, and try to build upon that momentum. If you're in the private sector, try to recognize who in the public sector can partner with you to leverage your efforts around sustainability and help you build upon that momentum. And also try to recognize how you best can support the public sector and how it can be the most effective in helping you build upon that momentum. If you're in the public sector, try to do the same thing, but also make sure that you are thinking about how the decisions that you make or don't make and the policies that you create or implement, how they affect your partners in the private sector and how they affect your constituents and how they affect their ability to build upon our common goals of sustainability. We should also try to identify if our institutions and our organizational structures, whether they are private or public, are themselves sustainable and resilient. I'm going to use 2 examples. And one is the legislature, which I'm very familiar with. I lobbied the legislature for 15 years before I ran for office and was in the state assembly and then the state senate, and have chaired a pretty heavy duty committee and seen kind of the inner workings of how all of that is. And using that example, think of our Nevada legislature. It's a citizen legislature. That means we all have a job, hopefully. And it's also very part-time. It meets 120 days every other year, of which you get paid 60 of those days. Makes 0 sense. And so what you have no staff, you have no resources, and everything that you do, whether it be flying to a conference in another state to learn how you can better serve your constituents and be a better policymaker, where you can learn about sustainability, Everything you do in that office comes from the funding of donors. Think about that, right? The funding of donors. That's not smart. Governor's office is another example. The governor's office, underfunded, understaffed, low, non-competitive wages, and the smallest governor's office in the country. We're not the smallest state by far. So, ask yourself, does that model serve Nevadans? Does it serve your community or your industry? Is it sustainable or resilient? Does it help you build upon your sustainability momentum? It was just tested, and my answer is no, it does not. And so we need to think about our institutions and think about our structures and think about how that can help us build upon sustainability and if it is in fact sustainable. In the business that I'm in, sustainability and resiliency are achieved by having a diversity of resources. In the energy business, a diversity of resources provide the best resiliency and sustainability. Does your board, does your staff reflect that diversification of resources? And do our elected officials reflect that diversity of background, of life experience, of knowledge? Do we have a diversity of opinions and ideas in our business, in our government agencies, or in our elected bodies? The intersections of social, economic, and environmental sustainability are not always obvious. The conversations we will have this afternoon, and again later tonight, will give us all ideas on how they do in fact overlap and intersect, and how we can take that understanding home with us to build upon our momentum and seize upon opportunities to create a more sustainable Nevada. Due largely to the hard work of many of the people in this room, just think about all of the progress we have made and where we now lead on certain areas when it comes to sustainability. The diversification of our economy. We've done an amazing job of diversifying our economy over the last several years. Up north, renewable energy, energy storage, and transmission. We are a leader in the nation on all three of those things, and we have nothing but plenty of runway out in front of us to continue to lead on all of those things. Green buildings and energy efficiency. Food waste. Think of the gaming industry alone, how they lead on being the biggest and most complex, the entertainment and resorts industry in our state, the most biggest and complex types of businesses and buildings in the country, and how they're leading on green buildings and food waste and energy efficiency and water conservation. While we are in a horrible drought, a drought that threatens our very existence as a state, we have become the most water efficient community in the country. So while there's more work to be done there, we lead on those issues. Here are just a few examples of issues where we've made some progress, but work remains to be done. Human trafficking, underemployment, wages, childcare. That's social sustainability, economic sustainability, diversification in Southern Nevada, revenue structures. We have a horribly flawed revenue system in the state of Nevada. We can still attract more folks to our state to visit our sporting events, to visit our amazing resorts and restaurants and gaming, to visit our outdoor recreation. And then pandemics, natural disasters, unforeseen events, both past, present, and future. We need to be more resilient and sustainable around those events. And then environmentally, wildfires, pollution, air quality, severe drought, energy reliability and affordability, man-made climate disruption. These are things that we have so much work to do on, yet so many opportunities exist in the policy space, but also in the business space to address those obstacles. And I can't leave here without talking about things like homelessness, housing availability, affordability, public education, healthcare, transportation. These are things that we have so much work to do in our state, but again, create opportunities for all of us in this room. So once again, I would like to thank you all for being here, and I look forward to these important conversations that we're going to be having together and how we can take what we have learned today from those conversations back to the community that we all love. So thank you, and I would like to get started with our program by introducing my good friend, Treasurer Zach Conine. And Zach has brought a tremendous amount of private sector experience into his public sector world, into his public sector role. And I'm not overstating his importance into the economic response that we had to the pandemic. As the chair of finance, chair of interim finance, I worked so closely with Treasurer Conine and so closely with the governor's office to try to keep us on the right path. And our credit rating and balance sheet as a state of the state of Nevada is reflected in a lot of that hard work that he did. So Zach, please come on up.
Well, thank you so much, Senator, for the kind words. Before I get started, I really cannot overstate how much the man next to me and like 5 other people did to keep the wheels on from an economic perspective during this crisis. I'm going to talk a little bit about it, but I think it's just so important that we realize that, I get paid to be your treasurer, not a lot, but I do get paid to be your treasurer. The senator gets $7,000 every, is that what it is? Every 2 years. $7,000 every 2 years, which is not an investment we would make in the state treasury, but it's one he has chosen to make. So I think if we could just take a moment and give him a round of applause, because if not for Chris Brooks, we would be up a creek. We'd be up a dry creek, unfortunately, given some of the other sustainability things we have to talk about. But thank you again for the kind introduction. Thank you to Impact Nevada for putting this conference together so we can talk about the best ways to move our state forward and improve the quality of life for Nevada's residents, which should, of course, be all of our North Star. I'm Zach Conine, and I have the pleasure of being the 23rd state treasurer of the great state of Nevada. There's some question as to who is the best treasurer in the history of the state of Nevada. We'll see who figures that out. But I know I'm not the worst, and I'll start with this just because no one's ever heard this story, and every time I got a room full of people. So the first treasurer was a guy named Eben Rhodes, right? 1864. He gets elected. He makes his brother the chief deputy of his office. Things are going well. It's a 2-year term at that point. He gets reelected, feeling pretty good. He's doing some loans in the private sector. He's helping people out. He gave Governor Blaisdell, I've never gotten a good answer there, a loan on his house. And things are going pretty well, right? And then Eben takes about 18% of the general fund in gold bullion, loads up a horse-drawn carriage, and flees the state. The first treasurer stole 16% of the general fund in gold. He then fled to California, San Francisco, first Nevadan actually to move in that direction, and buys an opium den that he lives over for a couple of years until they catch him, at which point he jumps off the roof, killing himself. So regardless of whether or not we are the best treasurer or one of the best treasurers or even one of the worst treasurers, we're definitely not the worst treasurer. A lot of people haven't thought of the Treasury, which is what we're now calling the State Treasurer's Office because it just sounds more fun, as a driver of economic opportunity for the state. And that's largely because we haven't had a situation where we've needed to. But to Senator Brooks's point, in the middle of this economic crisis, we found ourselves with too many boats, too many oars, and not enough rowers. And so we all pitched in a bit of a different ways. The traditional functions of the office, I'm sure many of you know about, cash management, check distribution, investments, debt management. That's mostly what the treasurer has done historically, even focused mostly on cash management. Now, over the years, we've expanded the scope of the office. We've added things like college savings, our 5 college savings plan programs, which currently manage a little bit more than $37 billion. And if you're asking yourself, my, that's great. There's only 3 million people in Nevada. That's a ton of college savings assets. Well, for good or for bad, many of our college savings assets are actually from people from other states. They come to our state to invest because the programs are so good, and then we're able to use those dollars to help Nevadans. We also administer unclaimed property. For those of you who don't know what unclaimed property is, it's basically the best politician card trick that we've ever had. We return money to Nevadans, which is a nice thing to do. Unclaimed property is a lot of things. Sometimes it's a paycheck that you haven't cashed or a vendor check that never got cashed. Sometimes it's things in a safety deposit box if the person becomes lost. Does anyone in this room have a safety deposit box? Okay, good. You don't want to say, but someone in this room statistically does. Here's the thing. If you have something embarrassing in that safety deposit box and you die, it will come to me and we will make fun of you. So please know that things in a safety deposit box do eventually end up in the state treasury. Now, of course, I have to plug that program, so you should go to claimittnevada.gov. You should search .org or .gov. You should search your name. You should find out if you have unclaimed property. I think you had a little bit of unclaimed property. Have we returned that yet? No. All right, we're keeping it. But if you have unclaimed property, it was in it was in a safety deposit box, and that's why it doesn't want to claim it. Okay. So in addition to the college savings and unclaimed property programs, I am the state's chief investment officer. We manage a portfolio of about $7 billion, primarily invested in things that are relatively low risk, right? So treasuries, agencies, commercial notes, corporate paper, Bitcoin, things that aren't going to be super volatile over a period of time. And in that, investing at its core is exchanging a little bit of opportunity now for more opportunity later. Right? We're taking some of that money, we're saying we're not going to spend it today, we're going to spend it in a month or a year or 5 years, but we're going to try and get anything more of it. When families are making the decision to invest in their kids' college savings programs, it is the same thing. They're taking a little bit of money now that they could spend on going to the movies, and they're saying we're going to spend that on college later, and hopefully it's a little bigger. And that dovetails nicely into the work that you all are doing. Right? Sustainability efforts aren't necessarily for if I do this thing right today, tomorrow is going to be better, but it will be better a year from now. It will be better 5 years from now. It will be better for your kids and for my kids. My twins turned 5 today, so if I have frosting somewhere on my suit that I haven't noticed yet, you can just not tell me that's okay. We're just going to get through it. But we know if we work collaboratively with members of the business community, our friends in labor, our local government officials, we can move the state forward in a way that advances economic opportunities for the diverse communities who call Nevada home. We've focused on sustainability for years in Nevada. It's always been a topic of conversation, at least in the last 5 to 10 years. But we never really understood how important sustainability and resilience was until the pandemic hit, right? And we realized that we didn't have to be resilient just to make more money. We didn't have to be resilient for the future. We had to be resilient right now. And for a long time, Nevadans have been called on to be resilient when the government hasn't been prepared to do the work, right? We just haven't been ready. And so to the senator's point, there are a lot of times where we look at Nevadans and we're like, hey, gosh, this one's going to be bad, but we hope you all get through it just fine with this, right? Nevadans will pull through. They're resilient. And I think one of the things we learned during the pandemic is that they shouldn't have to be that resilient because we haven't planned. And that gets into the sustainability work that I think is in front of us. So let me just take a few moments to tell you a little bit about the COVID response, because again, I think it's important to understand how many things had to be cobbled together because they did not exist, because the systems weren't in place to do the work, and so we had to create them in real time. It's no secret, of course, that Nevada was one of the hardest hit states around the pandemic. With the shutdowns on the Strip, this building and many others went dark overnight. Hundreds of thousands of hospitality and other workers found themselves out of work, and we had one of the worst unemployment rates in the country. Our vibrant convention and entertainment industry shuts down overnight. We had workers across the state not just trying to figure out what they're going to do to pay for their kids' college savings, or how they're going to invest in their house to make it more energy efficient. They're worried about how they're going to put food on the table tomorrow, right? We saw industries that had to stay open. We saw first responders, grocery store workers, truck drivers who had to continue going to work, putting themselves and their family in harm's way. We all heard the story about the first responders who would go and sleep in their garage because at the beginning of the pandemic, we weren't really sure how it was transmitted. They wanted to make sure they kept their family safe pre-vaccine. And nevertheless, in the face of that economic downturn, we came together to meet the needs of Nevada's families. The COVID-19 task force, a fantastic example of a public-private partnership, worked quickly to get masks and PPE in the hands of medical professionals. Nonprofit organizations worked tirelessly to help individuals apply for some of these government programs that we've realized weren't as resilient as they needed to be. And I'll just take an aside because Senator and I talk about this a fair amount. Government programs, I've determined, basically fall into two buckets. You've got your mazes and you got your funnels, right? Funnels are programs where when people apply, we want to make sure that they move down the system and quickly get resources back. Those are the types of programs we were creating during the pandemic. But some of those legacy programs that weren't sustainable, that weren't resilient, things like the UI system and DETR, were set up as mazes, where individuals would go into the top, and if they made a wrong turn, they'd get stuck in adjudication, and then they'd make another wrong turn. And that was okay when there were 200 people a week applying, and we could manually get them through the process, but it didn't work long term. That's the kind of sustainability and resiliency that I think we've identified, especially during the pandemic, and I know the Senator and myself and a few others are deeply committed to making sure get fixed. The governor's not here, so I can use my favorite metaphor, which he does not like, which is when the tide goes out, you can see who's wearing a swimsuit. And we certainly found there were a lot of places where, naked in the surf. But we quickly moved into economic response. Now, look, in the Treasury, although I was on Twitter, I did not become an epidemiologist like most people on Twitter. And so we knew we couldn't move directly into health response. I get kind of squeamish at the sight of blood. Nobody needs me in that room. And so we moved on to economic response and recovery. We realized, and we looked back at the last recession. I had the pleasure of being able to talk to the treasurer at the time, Kate Marshall, who knew a lot about it and worked through some of the same cash flow issues we were working through. We understood that in Nevada, housing instability is economic instability, right? We have an economy and a tax system that is, as the Senator mentioned, deeply, deeply flawed. And one of the reasons is because it counts on people consuming. We need people to go and gamble. We need people to go and eat. We need people to go and buy things. And when someone is housing insecure, the chances that they're going to do that goes way, way down. And so we started trying to figure out what we could do to keep Nevadans in their homes, and we started making calls. Now, as many of you know, of course, the treasurer is responsible for who is allowed to bank or not bank in the state, right? So we have a fair amount of power over banks. I see a couple of you nodding. That's actually not true. I have absolutely nothing to do with that. But you know who else didn't know that? Banks. And so we started calling banks and mortgage brokers and credit unions and saying, hey, look, it's the treasurer of the state of Nevada. I need you to step up and offer forbearance to Nevadans. I need people who have homes in Nevada to not worry that they're going to get foreclosed on. And to their credit, to a person, they all did. And so Nevada was the second state in the union to have forbearance options for our residents. We were able to help Nevadans keep their homes weeks before the federal government came in and FHA, Fannie, Freddie changed the rules so that those could go into forbearance. And the best part about this is, of course, sometimes a CEO, and this is, I know, something that a lot of you have to deal with, sometimes a CEO or a VP will make a decision, and that decision won't necessarily translate down to the folks at the call center, right? They don't get the memo, they don't look at the promotion, they don't whatever. And so we would find, of course, I'm out there talking about these great protections we have, and Nevadans certainly are not shy telling us when we as the government are telling them one thing and they're hearing another thing on the ground, and so they would call us. And they'd say, well, Susie, Nevadan has a home and she's called whatever the bank is, and the bank won't call her back. She can't go into forbearance. They're telling her that she has to default on her loan if she wants help. We knew that wasn't actually what they said, and so we'd put Susie on hold and we'd call up the vice president of the bank and we'd merge the two calls together. And we'd say, Mr. Vice President and Susie, you guys seem to have a little bit of a communication issue. Could you sort this out? And then we just put them on mute and listen. And a lot of those got solved. And we also found that once we did that about 2 or 3 times, the vice presidents make sure that the call centers were doing the thing that they were supposed to be doing. Now, we moved on from mortgage servicers and homeowners into renters. We created a program that would come to be called the CHAP, the Coronavirus Housing Assistance Program. One of the things that you find in government is we can't actually pay our people more, so we allow them to name things. That's how we ended up with CHAP and TOTS and CRAG. CRAG, which was the Commercial Rental Assistance Grant Program, was almost the Commercial Rental Assistance Program, but we caught that before we went to press. We work collaboratively with landlords, tenants, nonprofit partners like Christine Hess and others And so far, that program has distributed more than $300 million into more than 60,000 Nevada households, right? And while in a lot of times Nevada is often hit for being a little slow, right? 47th out of 50th, 51st out of 50, still sort of mad about that one. This program is the 12th fastest in the nation. We've gotten more money into the hands of more homeowners than California and a number of others by credit. And it is because of that public-private partnership, working with nonprofits, working with government, working with local governments. And Commissioner Jones is in the room, right? How many times did we have a conversation about speeding up CHAP? And working together, we were able to get that money out the door. But we knew it wasn't just individuals. We know there were businesses, and Nevada small businesses are the lifeblood of the economy. We hope they're going to be the backbone of our recovery. And so Senator Brooks and like 3 other people and I started talking about how are we going to get money back to the hands of small businesses. And we looked at the first program that had come through, which was the PPP, right? And a lot of folks have heard about PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, right? One of the largest small business grant programs in the history of the country. Here's the problem with PPP. In the first round, most of the people who got PPP looked like me, right? They were white males of an age. They had access to banking relationships. They had been doing this for a long time. They didn't need the money quite as much as those small businesses who didn't have those banking relationships, who didn't have lines of credit they could go, who didn't have equity to go for. And so when we created a program which we called the Pandemic Emergency Technical Support Grant, or PETS grant, again, can't name, or can't pay, so we let them name. The PETS grant, we went the other way. We went from it being a maze to a funnel, and we did $10,000 grants. Now, when we started that program, we put $20 million into it, and I think we talked around that time, and we were like, it's probably not going to be enough, but hopefully it's close. We started the program, we started taking applications on October 19th at 9 a.m. By 10:30, we had $20 million worth of applications. By the end of the day, we had $70 million of applications, and by the time we shut the program down on Thursday, we had $152 million worth of applications for a program that had $20 million into it. Now, luckily, the governor and the legislature, and of course, finance, were willing to give us a little bit more money, so we went from 20 to 30, 30 to 50, 50 to 102, which made it the state's largest program for small businesses in history. And it wasn't just the largest program for small businesses, it was the largest program for nonprofits, it was the largest program for businesses owned by women, the largest program for businesses owned by individuals with disabilities, the largest program for businesses owned by veterans, and the largest program for businesses run by people of color. And we did that because we prioritized those groups, because we knew that they weren't getting access to other things. We built some additional resilience into the system, but we were not prepared for that to come through. There were 4 of us looking at applications and an outside vendor, and we realized early on that every application that we approved that was fraudulent was an application that was going to get denied. We knew we didn't have enough money. And so we realized we could outsource some of the paperwork, but we couldn't outsource the responsibility. And so Director Brown, the head of GOED, the Governor's Office of Economic Development, myself, 2 other people, we started calling all these businesses. And so we called more than 10,000 businesses every day, Saturday, Sunday. By the by, if you're ever trying to get a hold of somebody, calling them on a Sunday afternoon, all small business owners pick up on a Sunday afternoon. I don't know what it is. That will make them very happy. That will make your wife very upset. And so there's a trade-off there. But we called these businesses, we got them on the phone, and we looked for fraud. We looked for ways that we could stop this from going sideways to us. We created, in the moment, some resiliency because the system wasn't there. There was no tool to do this. There was no team who did this work. My personal favorite was we found a company in Mesquite that was claiming to be a food truck, a barbecue food truck. And I was calling them around lunchtime. I was pretty hungry already. I was pretty excited to talk to this guy. I don't remember his name. Let's say his name is Keith. And I said, Keith, tell me about your business. And he said, well, we're a barbecue food truck. Well, that's neat. Where do you do business? Well, we do it at events and stuff, and so we haven't been able to do events because we're mostly a food truck for events, and of course, COVID, no events. I said, okay. Well, how would I find you, right? Like if I wanted to hire you for an event, how would I do? Well, we try to keep a low profile. You try to keep a low profile. Yeah, it's people get out there with the social media and stuff, and we don't like that. Okay. And when you're talking to somebody and it just feels like they're bullshitting you a little bit, which, by the by, is not a feeling you should have right now. And so I said, I went to a hotel school way back when, and I said, well, okay, Keith, how do you make your brisket? And Keith said, but we use an oven. I said, no, Keith. How do you make your brisket? Do you use a wet or a dry rub? How long are you soaking it? What temperature are you cooking at? What cut of meat is it? Where is that cut of meat on a cow? And I asked him all these questions. He couldn't answer them. And I said, Keith, we're denying your application, but I'll send you the form. You can appeal it if you want to. Just as a note, if you appeal it and you're still fraudulent, that's when we send it to the Attorney General's office. Make whatever choice you want to make. We never heard from Keith again. But we had to create things like that in the government every day because we do not have any resiliency built into the system. We've always put it back on Nevadans, and that's why I'm happy to be here today, because this is the type of work we need you all to do. Because there's like 6 of us, right? I mean, smallest governor's office in my office, the Treasury, has 4 times as many people working in it than the governor's office does. And we have 46 people, right? We have a small government, and so we need the private sector to step up and do the work that you're all doing, because we don't have the resources to do it ourselves. Now, rebounding from the pandemic, of course, wouldn't be a thing we'd be involved in, but again, canoes, oars, fewer guys. I'm not the person you call when you need to move a canoe, but if nobody else is there, I guess it worked. And so the legislature had to make some really aggressive and tough choices about budgets, right? I mean, those meetings went on to the night, and there are no good choices in a place where the state already is under-resourced. But our federal delegation, for the first time since 1864, was able to really bring a massive amount of support into the state through the American Rescue Plan Act. Nevada was allocated about $6.7 billion to respond and rebuild from the pandemic. Our funding represented about 150% of our annual budget coming in at once. We got a wire on June 15th of 2021 for 2.768, et cetera, billion. Has anybody ever gotten a wire for $2.7 billion? It's a weird feeling. And of course, they sent it to us at 12:15 on a Friday. So for anybody in the investment space, you had about 45 minutes to deploy $2.7 billion of capital. So if anyone was trying to sell the state a bond that day, thank you, we bought it. We knew going into that, Senator Brooks, myself, Maggie Carlton over in the Assembly, and the governor and others, we knew that this kind of money was unprecedented. We weren't going to be able to get another shot at this. And let's hope we don't get another shot at this because people died, right? Like, that exchange is not a good exchange, but we had a chance. And so we created something called the Every Nevadan Recovery Framework, an ethos that would speak to, here are the things we want to spend money on, here are the problems we're trying to solve. And that included a lot of the things that we had found during the pandemic didn't work. It also included refunding one of the things that during the pandemic did work, which is our rainy day fund, or the account for stabilization, which we drew down at the beginning of the pandemic and is, as of today, more healthy than it was going into the pandemic, right? Now, we couldn't use those American Rescue Plan dollars for that, but of course, as everybody in the room knows, money is fungible, and so we were able to replenish that, which we're excited about. Now, after the Every Nevadan Recovery Framework was set up, we created the Nevada Recovers Listening Tour, which seemed like a really good idea when we started talking about it, right? The governor was excited, you were excited, everyone was like, this is great, we should do this. And we said, we're gonna do 75 meetings in 75 days. That was a bit ambitious. We ended up going for about 83 days, and we did 123 meetings. It was the largest constituent engagement process in the history of the state. Many of you were there. We did some panels together. We did some panels when we were traveling, and everyone was on different Zooms. We went everywhere. We went to Goldfield. We did a panel in Goldfield. There's about 852 people who live in Goldfield. There were 45 of them at this meeting, which from a percentage standpoint means that Goldfield cares a lot more about what's going on in Goldfield than other places. That's okay. I won't hold it against you all. But we heard about things that they needed. We heard about how their towns did not have resilient infrastructure. We heard about places in Nevada where if one power line goes down, the whole town goes out. We went to places in Nevada, like the Walker River Paiute tribes, land where they don't have internet at all. And so we heard about those issues. We also heard about in the traditional, in our urban core, in the historic West Side in East Las Vegas, we heard about places where students were going and sitting outside of Taco Bell to get access to the internet that they needed in order to go to school, right? We can build a better Nevada than that, but it requires building that resiliency. And because of what we heard during the listening tour, right? And the big things I don't think will surprise everyone. We heard a lot about housing. We heard a lot about childcare. We heard a lot about digital infrastructure and the internet. We heard a lot about mental health. The legislature and the governor have been able to allocate capital to that work. $500 million of affordable housing work through the Homies Nevada initiative. And I should point out, Christine's in the room. When we asked groups to come together and put together plans, how could we possibly spend this money in the most impactful way possible? The Housing Coalition got together quickly, and you had, I don't know how many meetings, probably a dozen meetings, with hundreds of people in the room, and they put together a plan, and then the government was able to act on that plan. We wouldn't have been able to put together a plan like that because we don't have the resources, but you guys did, so thank you for that. And not just the Housing Coalition, but hundreds of groups came together. Strategic investments to combat hunger and food insecurity, a first-in-the-nation program that we call the Transforming Opportunities for Toddlers and Students, or TOTS program. Again, can't pay people more, so we let them name things. So the TOTS, which put $12 million into families' hands through something called ABLE accounts, Achieving a Better Life Experience accounts, that went to kids with disabilities who were suffering from learning loss. Great. Okay. So now we've gotten through some of the response and we start looking at the recovery. We knew that people were going to want to come back to Vegas. If there's one thing that we're sure of, it's that when Vegas is open, people want to be here, and that's great. But as the senator mentioned, we've done a good job of diversifying Northern Nevada. We have not done a good job of diversifying Southern Nevada, and the federal government shows up now with the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which became the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, and we find ourselves making sure that we have the resiliency and the systems we need in order to get that done. And that's why we put together a little thing called the State Infrastructure Bank. Now, the State Infrastructure Bank was originally passed in 2017, which for anyone keeping track was when we first expected Infrastructure Week to show up. So 2017, we expected a bunch of money to come in, we expected the rest, and we created the Infrastructure Bank. And that did transportation projects and utility projects, and like many good state ideas, was put into an exceptionally nice binder, put on the shelf somewhere, and no one did anything with it. And then we come along, 2019, we start talking about it. 2021, we put it, Senator and I and others get it in the State of the State, and we start talking about this infrastructure bank as a way that we can finally solve one of Nevada's biggest issues, which is that we're really bad at accepting federal funding. We're bad because the structure is bad. We're bad because 40 years ago when people were creating these mazes, they went through a process of saying, well, we don't need any help from the federal government. We can do this on our own, right? We're Nevada strong, et cetera, et cetera. But here's the thing, we all pay for it, right? Our dollars go into the federal government's coffers, the federal treasury, and then they give them to Kansas. And so we've been committed to making sure those dollars come back. And the infrastructure bank's one of the ways we can do it because we expanded what it could be used for. So now it's not just transportation projects and utility projects, it's housing, education, climate-related and sustainable projects, digital infrastructure. And we have now an infrastructure bank that is as broad as any infrastructure bank in the country and is now being copied by other states. It also gave us the opportunity, and the Senator mentioned, thank you for the plug, that we have the state's highest credit rating in history. And that highest credit rating allows us to borrow money at a cheaper interest rate. And we've been able to use that just 2 weeks ago to issue the state's first ever social bond. So the first time the state has ever borrowed money to use for a social purpose, and we're going to use it for education, and we're going to use it for housing. And not only are we going to use it for education, we're actually partnering with the private sector so that $20 million of those housing dollars are going to become about $200 million worth of affordable housing investment in the state of Nevada. These are the sorts of things we can do as we build them. That's where we need your help. And now I know that I'm only supposed to go for a certain period of time, and I have this whole bond presentation, but we'll skip all that. But I think, to just wrap up briefly, the thing that we learned during the pandemic is that we need better systems, that we are not prepared. And until we create that safety net, until we create the systems that need to be there all the time, not just when things are bad, but when things are good, to raise the quality of life for Nevadans. Until we build that, we will continue having a boom and bust cycle. We will be unsustainable in perpetuity. And so I'm grateful that you all are here today. Thanks for inviting me to talk at you for a while about some of the work that we've done in the Treasury and about some of the work that we hope to do in the future. But thank you again for having me. I'm Zach Conine. I'm a Nevada State Treasurer. Have a great day.
You see why I went first. So thank you, Treasurer Conine. And that's a perfect example of what happens when you bring private sector experience, private sector knowledge, and to the public sector, especially in a time when we needed it the most. And also, thank you for not taking 18% of our state's general fund on a covered wagon full of gold bullion. The bar is low. And so I want to thank you so much, Treasurer. And so next I want to bring up a leader in our community, somebody who, as a native Las Vegan, I seems like have been there my entire life, and somebody who brings a tremendous amount of public sector knowledge and experience to the private sector, and how that can benefit how we achieve sustainability in our community. And so please come on up and join us, Jan Jones-Blackhurst, and she will be our next speaker. And please, thank you for welcoming her.
Thank you. I'm going to be pretty direct today because I'm not running for anything, so I can. I feel like I've been giving the same speech to this community for the last 30 years. Let's go back to 1991 and look what the issues were. The issues were responsible growth, preservation of downtown, growth on the Las Vegas Strip, building out our hospitality offering, homelessness, new energy, water conservation, mass transportation, highway systems, affordable housing, responsible representation of women and other underserved populations, both in business and in government. So where are we today? We've made some progress. Downtown's doing really well. We've got an incredible system of highways. We're finally getting to a mass transportation that will actually link not only the Strip with the Boring Company to the airport, but allow us to do it in an energy-efficient way. Homelessness were a disaster. In 1992, we actually had, in fact, my first meeting as mayor, the homeless marched on City Hall. And everybody said, oh my God, you can't go out there. These are dangerous people. I said, well, I'm going. So my bodyguards went with me. And they weren't dangerous people. They were hungry people. And they were people that didn't know where to go to services. And they were people that had nowhere to live. And so then we put together a pretty comprehensive plan. We had a crisis intervention center on Main Street. In that crisis intervention center, there were representatives from city, county, state, federal, veterans. So all they had to do was walk in, have an intake, and be sent to a cubicle to be told where to access services. We had long-term care, we had short-term care, we had housing we built the first SRO for people who were transitioning so they would have a place to live. We started affordable housing with Arnie Stock. 30 years later, it's all gone. We're starting over again. And some of that, to me, is because we did a good job of building out the hospitality community. We are just booming. We haven't done a great job of building out the community and what we stand for and the services we provide. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We have a tendency to be more competitive than collective. We've got a lot of different governments that are all working hard to do good things, but they don't talk particularly well with each other, because then who's going to get the credit? We have the inability to realize that these programs take time. And unless you set a standard, unless you make that standard very visual, unless you measure against your success at achieving that standard, you're going to keep going in circles. I can understand why an incoming administration would defund the homeless programs that were in place. They cost a lot of money. But when you do that, if they cost a lot of money then, boy, you better really be prepared for what it's going to cost today. I can't tell you how many commissions I've sat on that were to be regional in nature. We were going to really sit down and we were going to talk about how to do this. And it's why I'm so pleased to see the composition of this group today and Lauren's dedication at making sure you had representatives from government, from business, from NGOs, but you really have to have a plan. You need to measure against that plan. You need to hold elected officials and government accountable for supporting that plan. And you need to do it in a focused way. Because if you don't, 20 years from now, we're going to be sitting here again with the very best of intentions, but with not a lot to show for what it makes to build a sustainable community. Communities, we can be wonderful as the #1 hospitality destination. Now we're the #1 sports destination. We should be the #1 community destination. Do you know how many people don't even know what a wonderful place Las Vegas is? And it drives me nuts. Zach was talking about economic diversification. Well, there's sort of a reason we haven't been very successful with economic diversification. First of all, if you go out and look, what do we always talk about? Oh, we've got a terrible education system. Oh, we don't do this well. Now, if you're a company coming and all you're hearing is how bad our education is and how bad our water quality is and how bad, I think you're going to maybe take a second to look somewhere else. The other thing we do, we have 17 economic development entities. And do you think they talk to each other? Nope. They're all working really hard, but they're not intersecting. It's the intersection of good intentions that give results. So I would say to this group today, we're on the precipice of finally really being the community I think we all want to be, one that's responsible, one that invests in human capital, not just in infrastructure, one that is looking to tell a story about Nevada that resonates not only with the people who live here, but the people we want to relocate here. A story that actually shows definitive results. I mean, when I go down to Main Street today, I just don't even know what to say. How could we have let this explode at this level? A lot of people talking about it, but it's going to take collective action to fix it. How do we build the community that all of you believe in? That's why you're a part of ConveneNV. It takes focus. Know what we're trying to fix. It takes measurement. What do we look like today? What do we want to look like in 5 years? And in 5 years, what do we look like? It takes accountability. Accountability not just of elected officials and government entities, but accountability of business and of community groups, that this matters and that it's not going to happen on its own. Coalition, not competition. Got to find a way that we work together. I used to always say, and I really believe it, there's no limit to what we can achieve if we're not worried about who gets the credit. If we're really trying to build this, we can do it. And the economic diversification, which gives us the new revenue, the new resource that we need to build a solid enough economic base that governments have the resources that they need to invest in the programs that we all want. So I'm so pleased that ConveneNV has stayed as steadfast, that the group is looking for what those core initiatives are. Don't try to solve everything. Pick the ones that we've really been trying to solve for decades: homelessness, affordable housing, efficient energy. And then make sure that you're measuring against your ability to achieve those goals and holding yourself and everyone in the community accountable that we make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much for keeping it real. I think that's something that we all need to hear. And it's, whether it was Treasurer Conine or Jan talking about really some of these issues and that have plagued our community for, since she was mayor, since I've been of voting age, and even before that. But I do appreciate how you said, if we keep repeating these same negative things over and over again, not only are we just going to manifest them, we're also, we're chasing away people who want to help because they'll be overwhelmed, or those who we want to attract to our community. And so, as I said earlier, this is my community. My grandkids live here. My kids live here. My great-grandparents and grandparents are buried here. This is my community, and it breaks my heart when I hear people parrot the same negative things over and over again. But that's why y'all are here today, because we're going to talk about how we can fix these issues. And we're going to talk about what we've done that has worked, and like Jan said, what we can concentrate on and show measurable results on. So that's why I'm excited about the panels and excited about the speakers that we had, and really excited about the participation of such a great group of Nevadans in this room today. So next up, we have our first panel, and our first panel is going to be on social sustainability, and it will be moderated by Mr. Dale Urquiaga from, I'm sorry, I'm still thinking of you in your former role in government, but from the Gwynn Center, the amazing Gwynn Center. So come on up.
Good afternoon. I'm Dale Urquiaga, and I have the privilege of serving as the executive director of the Gwynn Center. You probably knew my predecessor, Nancy Brune. I've been in this job about 4.5 months. But as the senator alluded, I served in many roles in government in the last 35 years. I was listening to the speakers and thinking I may be Nevada's most renewable resource with the number of public jobs that I have held. But this job puts me at a think tank. That's what a policy center is commonly known as, named for the late Governor Kenny Gwynn. I had the privilege of serving in the Gwynn administration. And as I see Mayor Jones, I will tell her that had an election gone a different way, I might work at the Jan Jones Center for Policy Priorities. It's nice to see you again, Mayor. I first moved to this valley 25 years ago, and I have been here off and on and have seen many social policy issues be confronted, as the mayor and the treasurer and the senator have reminded us. Today you have a panel who's going to talk about just 3 of those issues: housing, healthcare, and human trafficking, and the intersection with the livability and the social sustainability of our community. A couple of us have difficult last names to pronounce on this panel, so we're going to be the Dale E., Eric G., Nick F., and Christine H. panel, and we're going to dispense with last names. I will not spend a lot of time introducing them. You have their bios and titles. I will just tell you that they are all experts in their field, and I'm going to sit down with them and ask them questions. But as I do that, I want to give us all a framing phrase or quotation to think about the social sustainability momentum that you have made as a community here and that we have made as a state, and what lies ahead. I'm reading a book called The Weight of Ink, and this book quotes the Talmud, the Jewish book of law, with this phrase, and the phrase is most often associated with Oskar Schindler, you may know from the film that bears his name. But the phrase actually comes from the Talmud, and the phrase is this: he who saves one life saves the world. I'm going to update that a little bit for the 21st century and say a person who saves one life saves the world. And for this panel, I'm going to tweak it just a bit with respect to the Talmud. He who sustains one life sustains the world. So I'd like you to think about that and hold it as my expert panelists do a wonderful job answering the questions I'm about to put to them. And I'm going to sit down with you, Christine, and we'll start. Okay. It was very dramatic the way I walked across the stage, wasn't it? I forgot to tell Eric to save that seat for me. So we're going to start with an easy space. I'm going to have each of our panelists talk to you about the momentum that their particular subject matter area or organization has made in recent years to kind of just level set where we are. So Eric, since you took my seat, and since your name is even harder to pronounce than mine, I'd like to start with you. Tell us kind of the state of affairs and where you're at.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. Eric Golubieski, AKA Eric G. I'm a member of anti-human trafficking working group where I co-chair our efforts on behalf of the Nevada Resorts Association's Corporate Social Responsibility Coalition. And back in 2018, the Nevada Resorts Association CRS program established a number of goals, and one of them was ending human trafficking. And so we got together, all the major resorts, Caesars, MGM, Wynn, Boyd, Palms, Resorts World, and a few from Northern Nevada as well with the Pepper Mill, Grand Sierra Resort. And we have monthly calls to talk about human trafficking, focusing on awareness and developing best practices such as a victim-centered approach to, one, identify trafficking that may be occurring in our communities and how to save these victims and get them back to being independent and out of the trafficking cycle. And so I would say that in January, we've had a virtual statewide training seminar that involved the resorts, Department of Homeland Security, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, and a number of our nonprofit partners, Signs of Hope, Rise, St. Jude's Ranch. And we all got together and we talked about best practices for identifying trafficking. When you do identify someone, how can you help to get them out of being trafficked? Where to send them for resources, how to get those resources to them quickly. And everybody in our state is entirely focused on that. And I'm very proud that all the groups come together and really are focusing really hard on making sure that those victims have resources available and continuing to sustain those resources because we just can't afford to take a step back. I could tell you that I've had the opportunity to use the training to recover victims. And, you know, personally, I could tell you it hurts to see when another person is treated like that and you know that they're never going to be the same. And you know they're going to need, they're going to need mental health. They're going to need health services for the physical abuse. They're going to need places to go and shelter. They're going to need resources to help them get back on their feet, to get documents, IDs, and where to get their next meal from to get away from the trafficker. And so that's what we've been focused on currently over at the Nevada Resorts Association Anti-Trafficking Group.
Thank you. Nicholas.
Hi, all. My name is Nick Fritz. I'm the Impact Investing Director at Intermountain Healthcare. Many of you may not be familiar with Intermountain Healthcare. We're a large, now regional health system, nonprofit headquartered in Salt Lake City. And we're relatively new in the Nevada market. We've been here for 2 years or so. Senator Brooks, I think, put this question to us and encouraged us to think about what does sustainability mean for us. And I think for us, sustainability is about health equity. So, I want to talk about our sort of community health needs assessment that we're finishing up right now as we speak this week. I think we'll have sort of final results, but I got a little peek behind the curtain this week, and it really interesting. I just want to read off a couple things. I'm not going to focus on the negative here, but if you know anything about nonprofit health systems, triannually, we do a community health and needs assessment. So we look at sort of all available literature, as well as meet with community groups to just try to understand like what are the highest needs for health and what are the barriers for people accessing health care and achieving positive health outcomes. So here are the priorities that we're setting out for the next 3 years. Mental health, which is a priority, I think, across our region. Substance use and misuse, chronic disease, affordable and accessible care, and I think most interestingly for this conversation, the social determinants of health, specifically housing and transportation. This is the first time that social determinants have sort of made this list. And it's kind of a big deal because this sets sort of health system strategic priorities for the next 3 years. If you're not familiar with the term, this room probably is, but the social determinants of health are kind of broadly all of those factors that affect our day-to-day lives, right? It's where we live, where we work, where we play, our health behaviors. We know that collectively, all of these factors really create 60-70%, are responsible for 60-70% of health outcomes. Now, health care, high quality, affordable health care is sort of our main business, but if we're talking about creating health equity, that's only responsible for 10-15% of people's outcomes. So we're driving a lot of resources toward addressing these social determinants in all the communities we serve. A couple of kind of, thinking about momentum, a couple of things that we're doing across the system. One is, importantly, just screening for social determinants of health. So right now, rolling out across the system in emergent settings and in primary care settings, we are just simply screening patients to try to determine whether or not they may be lacking in some social determinant of health. So we're screening for, I'm going to read the list because if I don't read it, I'll forget one. Housing stability, interpersonal violence, education, transportation, food security, income and employment, family and social support, health behaviors, and utility needs. This screening is changing the way that we think about treating all of our patients. We're kind of in the middle of figuring out, okay, now we're screening, we're doing a pretty good job of referring to community partners in many instances, but how do we go a little bit further and maybe think further upstream even than that and address some of the community infrastructure that will support all those community resources. So, another thing that we're doing a lot of, I mentioned we're based in Salt Lake City, so much of this work has been done in Utah to date, but it's all sort of rolling down into Nevada now, is our impact investing work. So that's the area that I sort of work in. And we're doing a whole lot of housing investment. So investing in preservation, construction of affordable, oftentimes service-enriched housing, just to make sure that that community resource is there. I mean, we have a tremendous housing challenge in Utah, the same as we do in Nevada, it sounds like. And we're looking for more opportunities to address housing and other social determinant of health challenges in this market and others. So I'll stop there.
Great. Christine?
Awesome, thank you. It's so nice to be here. I appreciate being up here. I'm expert, so I've been doing this 2 years. Many of you don't know me, and while Senator Brooks, I'm not fourth generation. My husband is fourth generation Nevada, Elko Carson. Love it here. I come from a western state, Wyoming. My professional background in economic development, really, when I was looking for some professional growth, the position with the Housing Coalition, which is also a young organization. One of our founding board members, Elena Muley from Charles Schwab Bank, is in the room. Emily Paulson with Anthem is in the room, also a board member. But I took a look at this position. I was like, affordable housing in Nevada, okay, what is that? And I looked at it and I said, well, affordable housing in Nevada is economic development. Not only can I do that, I want to do that. I want to help uplift affordable housing in Nevada. And it really is, as I came into the space, I also was asking a lot of questions. And then by the way, I started March 2nd. My first trip here to Las Vegas, I'm based physically in Reno, was canceled due to the pandemic. So I got to meet many of you, and so today I met Lauren for the first time in person. I've been meeting you in person for the first time still, but I met so many people over Zoom, and I work so much down here in the South. So the pandemic did allow me to connect in this state. But what I can tell you when I first entered the space is I realized there was really an opportunity for affordable housing. What I saw was a space and a conversation that was so focused on our crisis, which, make no mistake, we're actually worse than Utah. We do have the most severe shortage of affordable housing in the country, especially for our most vulnerable population. So I entered the space, but I realized it can't be just about the sky is falling, right? We have got to focus on solutions and strategic solutions to provide sustainability. So that just gives you some insights into how I've entered the space, and I'm really fortunate and excited to be part of the work with the coalition. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit statewide. I have incredible board members from the north and the south, public and private sectors, urban and rural representation. So really all of those voices, and for any other nonprofit directors in here, you know what that means, a lot of voices, inform the work and help guide me and our team as we move forward in the state for affordable housing. And we'll speak a little bit more potentially about our crisis and definitely about the intersections. But I just want to tell you the momentum for affordable housing, the difference now. I can't talk about the momentum without taking just 1 second to acknowledge those in crisis, because I'm so excited about housing and where we are going as a state. But today, as we all sit comfortably in this room, there are people who are losing their homes. And thankfully, I could not function on the front lines, so I don't serve the front lines. But I, like many of you, get those calls, and I really feel for our Nevadans. And so while the work and the things I'm going to talk to you about today are amazing, awesome, Nevada is leading the country in many of these conversations, they're not necessarily enough for today. And so we do also need to address that. But I'm going to speak about the momentum. $500 million for affordable housing from the American Rescue Plan Act funds. That is awesome. I heard some conversations that our recommendation was helpful. It had positive traction. But like you, I was listening to the governor's State of the State. Almost fell off my chair. I said, oh my gosh, $500 million, that's incredible. And it came on the heels, though, of a $300 million commitment of our tax-exempt bond authority, which is awesome. Last fall in October, Michael Brown, Director Brown from the Governor's Office of Economic Development, was on our panel at our conference, and he said affordable housing is economic development. And I was like, you better believe it. That tax-exempt bond authority that was committed, that's almost our full annual allotment of $300 million. Economic development also accesses. And they were at that table to be part of that decision. So that was an incredible commitment. Additionally, $20 million of the $75 million from our general fund that the treasurer referenced from the State Infrastructure Bank to leverage $200 million of investment from the AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust. I don't know if you watched that presentation. If you're like me, you watched that presentation. I think it was in December. It was awesome. I looked around the country at this trust and where they are making investments around the country, and it's not in Nevada. So to bring those new dollars to Nevada and leverage $20 million with $200 million new dollars for affordable housing, that's amazing. Then I just want to recognize Clark County, $140 million. So right now, if you have an affordable housing project, by the way, you need to log on and submit your application because it's open until the 25th, but they have a community housing fund. And really appreciate that. City of Reno, Washoe, you know, the local jurisdictions are also doubling down with their commitment. And I'm talking about money, and it is hugely important and necessary. But of course, it's not everything. It's also the commitment, and the commitment of leadership by the Interim Finance Committee, Senator Brooks. The conversation at the April Interim Finance Committee, another meeting worth watching if you're like me, I was there in person, but was really incredible. You heard the deliberate and intentional conversation they had about and care for Nevada when they were committing those dollars, and they committed the first tranche of the $500 million, the $250 million for affordable housing. It was really, I was so grateful for their for their questions, for their conversations, and then I also want to recognize the partnerships it takes to make this happen. And the treasurer did point to it. We had over 70 stakeholders participate in a task force to develop that 500 million. Builders, right? Developers, for-profit, nonprofit, advocates, tenant advocates, healthcare was at the table, local governments at the table. The voices were at the table. Economic development, Mike, who you'll hear from later, was at the table. People came together because we realize it's not on any one of us, it's on all of us to make things happen. So you'll hear, I'm pretty excited. There's a lot of positive momentum for housing, and we're not going backwards, by the way, right? As long as I'm here, so hopefully my board members will keep me here. As long as I'm here, we're not going backwards. I'm really excited to move the needle in affordable housing and help all of our Nevadans and help our businesses and business community move forward.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So all of our opening speakers talked in some way about systems thinking or intersections. Lauren's nerdy word that she has asked me to use in this question is nexus. And I don't have enough degrees to use a word like nexus. So I'm going to think about intersections and sustainability in the definition that the senator gave us. And so I'd like our panelists to think about that. Nick's list teed up this question really nicely. But there are many reasons that these three topics are together. And it is not just that they all start with the letter H. That's nice alliteration, but that's not why they're together. What the mayor challenged us to think about is sort of the human capital aspect here. And so the one life that I asked you to think about, I'd like the panelists, you can go in any order that you want, and if nobody goes first, I'll call on you. Talk about the intersections of these three topics, if you would, for a moment.
Yeah, I'll start. So I could tell you on the working group, we sat down with some healthcare providers, and we started discussing that we know that these victims, again, they get a lot of psychological trauma, they get a lot of physical abuse, and that goes through our healthcare system. And I don't know if our healthcare system was prepared for receiving some of these victims. And so you can see how it is evolving in the healthcare system now, where they're doing the screening and they're asking certain questions and they're identifying the red flags when somebody comes in for treatment, to be able to connect that to human trafficking and the abuse that comes with human trafficking. And that way the doctors and the nurses and even the firefighters and the paramedics that are responding to these calls are able to identify this is what the problem is, and let me try to help you get to the resource you need to get to. We've also worked with different shelter providers so that when we have a victim, the process of rescue doesn't stop. They need somewhere to go to escape their trafficker. They need a safe place. And having that affordable housing in that location to be able to place people is an important factor of breaking the cycle of human trafficking. And that's kind of how I see it intersecting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think part of the reason that these problems that we're talking about, human trafficking, homelessness, others, are so intractable is that they are so interwoven with one another, right? Economic development is housing, is healthcare, is the solution to human trafficking, is homelessness. I mean, these things are all so wrapped up. I think, one area where this that illustrates this really well for me is on the housing side, and it's around access to care. So this is a problem across populations, right? All the way from deeply low income Medicaid population, way under sort of qualification limits for Medicaid, all the way up to folks who are doing okay. I mean, part of the challenge with access is on, for a low-income population who is housing unstable and who has all of these other challenges, economic challenges, interpersonal violence challenges. there just isn't bandwidth to go to a primary care provider, right? Like every day is sort of just dealing with an emergent situation. So they access healthcare in that way as well, right? They present to emergency rooms way too late to solve problems, or they present for things that could have been so easily prevented, with kind of regular care. The other side of that is we're in a provider crisis right now. I mean, it's really hard to find healthcare for a large system. It's hard to find healthcare providers. Part of the problem is housing. I mean, all the way from our medical assistants to physicians, there just is not housing availability. And in certain communities, particularly rural communities and resort communities, boy, it is very, very difficult. So these problems kind of come together for us in this way, where not only is for the sort of folks who aren't experiencing health equity, the low-income population, not only do they not have the bandwidth to be accessing care in the way they should, even if they can come up with that bandwidth, there just aren't providers available. I don't know how to fix it.
I thought you were going to give us all the answers, Nick. Well, I certainly am not going to give us the answers. But I am going to just make us all, I think a little harder about where we are and how we want to be as we come out of this pandemic, and as we leverage the momentum that I do think we have in housing. And one of the things I've learned about affordable housing, so first of all, I think the bandwidth. Sometimes it's hard for us to understand the bandwidth that some of our Nevadans are facing when they're housing insecure. And sometimes when I think about it and I'm talking to my friends who maybe don't understand it at all, they've never felt it, but how many here like to move, right? Anybody here? How many like me? I'm like, oh, thank God I'm still married and we moved, right? That's how stressful moving is. And in this affordable housing world, and particularly with those who are housing insecure, as we have increased rent prices, right? We've heard them, 20%, 30%, double, people trying to find housing, people are moving. Right? When Eric talks about the survivor victims finding some sort of shelter or transitional housing, then they have to move. How are we going to upskill? I ask my economic development friends, this is your problem too, not problem, but this is your opportunity too, right? Nobody's upskilling if they're in a housing crisis, if they're not stable. So when I think of the intersection of housing with healthcare, when I think about the intersection with human trafficking, I think housing security is absolutely foundational. It is foundational for all of us and the success of our economies to grow, of our businesses to grow. And it's time now that we take care of it. I will say that on the human trafficking side, Eric, I understood quickly as we looked at the panel. I said, okay, I could see where affordable housing and our severe shortage really comes in. For survivors, particularly the first rung out of homelessness is called supportive housing, which I'm still learning about because it's different than affordable housing. It's part of affordable housing, but it provides wraparound services. Nick could be the expert sitting to my left here for sure on that, and that's where we'll intersect for definitely. Transitional housing. But I read a report. I looked up information about human trafficking and housing to understand better how we intersect, and I found a real startling statistic. So 64% of the survivors in human trafficking, of a survey that was done of survivors by this group, I can point everybody to the study, but 64% of them said that when they were recruited into trafficking, they were either homeless or housing insecure. Right? So not only is affordable housing a solution in our lack of affordable housing for survivors an issue, but it's also part of the solution, part of prevention, right, for the human trafficking. The other component for housing is healthcare. We saw it in the pandemic more than anything, right? And so I've been very fortunate to partner with my health colleagues, and in Nevada, I think our healthcare is right alongside housing, and really grateful for that, because you cannot have a healthy outcome when you're paying 50, 60% of your income on your rent. You're probably not picking up that prescription, right, or visiting the doctor.
All right. So thank you, all of you. That's a great sort of weaving together of these complicated topics around the lives of people. So now I'm going to challenge you. Nick gave us kind of a pregnant pause of, I'm not going to solve that. And so I will say there are some electeds here in the room and many policymakers here in the room. And having been a policymaker a couple times in my life, it's really frustrating when someone brings you a problem with no hope of a solution.
Sorry about that,
It's
y'all.
like, yeah, thanks, Nick. It's like your cat brings you a dead mouse or a bird and just leaves it. You're like, what would you like me to do with that? So I want to ask you, these are political problems. We don't like the word politics, but too bad. These are political problems as well as policy problems. So how do you create ownership to move these interwoven topics about people together?
Yeah, it's a great question. As I was kind of thinking about this, I think there's the how and there's the who, right? So I think first about the who, and I think I've been really encouraged to hear the sort of cross-sector collaboration that's kind of in this room right now. I think part of solving these problems is coming at them a little bit differently. So identifying those institutions, whoever they are, right, cross-sector, who are anchor institutions in the community, I think is a really good place to start. I mean, these are if you're not familiar with the terminology, again, this room probably is, but anchor institutions are organizations that are rooted in place, right? They are here forever, and the health and well-being of the organization bends on the health and well-being of the communities they serve. Healthcare is a good example. Education is another. Really, I mean, in gaming, the resort community here, I think identifying those stakeholders who have a stake and talking about it a little bit differently. I mean, they may be political problems, but boy, it doesn't fall to policymakers exclusively. I think we have found the social determinants of health, this framework I've been talking about, can be a little bit of a unifying principle to bring anchors to the table. I mean, it's hard to find somebody who disagrees that we ought to be trying to improve life expectancy. And the magical thing about this framework is it's so broad. I mean, it encompasses just every facet of our lives. Everybody can see themselves in the social determinants of health, as organizations who are coming to a table to try to fix something. I think that may be a good place to start.
Yeah, when Jan Jones was talking, she really hit the nail on the head, and it made me reflect and realize something. Something that I learned going through this process of co-chairing the anti-trafficking committee, and that was that there are many organizations and entities that are doing some amazing work. And every time I sit down with a different group, they're doing some spectacular stuff to combat human trafficking, to rescue victims, to provide training. But everybody's kind of siloed. There's no organization that, kind of tells the right hand what the left hand is doing, or what's one side have available that the other side could use and combine to even become more powerful in resolving the problem. And so, that's what I kind of see as the challenge and the next step and the next phase in combating human trafficking in Nevada is taking all these hardworking, passionate people that are putting hours and hours on to rescue people, to put traffickers away, to educate people, is just to organize that and then put it in a way that allows the police department to know that, St. Jude has a resource for someone to go to, or that, RISE has available kits for a rescue victim, or there's an advocate available to go to this particular rescue and help that person get resources. Just kind of the communication and the organization piece of all the different entities that are through the state that are focusing on this problem, and then educating each other on what they do and how they can help each other and bring it together.
Yeah, I also was going to reference Jan. Yeah, from my partners, couldn't agree more, and we hear the collaboration, the coordination, and that is what it takes, and I think that's what we're seeing. What really struck me, and it's what I have realized, and especially when I have conversations with my policymaker friends, so last legislative session was my first session, right? Virtual, weird. And as I was advocating and still learning about the policies I'm advocating for, thankfully by about April, I had a pretty good idea, and I was like, ooh, that's why they're not that happy with me right now. Well, they'll come to my table, and they are. But what I realized was, oh my gosh, I sure hope nobody asks me what our goals are, because I don't know what they are, right? And I asked, I'm like, is there a report I'm not reading? Did I miss this one? Like, I've been reading so many things since I started and COVID. What is our plan for housing? Does anyone in this room know what our plan is for housing? What is our target? And how can I, as an advocate, and how can policymakers say, so first of all, I do want to say, Senator Brooks, I'm not suggesting that the $500 million was not good. It is very good. Because I'll tell you what we were having, right? So I'm also data-driven. From 2014 to 2020, and I'm going to talk about subsidized housing, housing that it has some federal subsidies in it that supports those to help so that they're not paying ideally more than 30% of their income. Housing's complex. We can have a conversation this evening. In 2014, we had 36,000 units. In 2020, we had 36,000 units. Like, is anyone not seeing what I'm seeing here? So when we say, will the $500 million help? Will the $300 million commitment of our bonding authority? You better believe it's going to help, because we need that catalyst to move the needle. But in the meantime, I would ask us, what is our plan? And I have my private sector friends that I got to meet last session, and they're members now of the coalition. I have my private sector friends saying, yeah, but we just need more housing and that'll help, right? That'll help stabilize the market. Well, first of all, no, affordable housing doesn't just happen. Below 50%, it does not get built by the market. So we do need the support of the federal government and the programs run by the state and our local governments. However, what I can't tell you is what we can do and how much opportunity there is even above that, right? From 0 to 120% of area median income. So if you think of area median income as $60,000 a year, these are working Nevadans. We have a housing shortage. And that does impact the availability at our lowest rents, right, for our lowest income Nevadans, because we have people taking up that housing that maybe if there were more options, there could be housing. But I could tell you we don't have a plan. And so for policymakers, you're doing the right thing. At this point, we have such a great need. We just need investments. We need resources and programs. But in order to move forward and make a difference, we need to be strategic and intentional. But in order to do that, we need to know our need. And so that's my challenge to all of us, actually, is to ask ourselves, what is that need?
Thank you. You stole my last question, so now I'm going to think a little bit about how I'm going to get us off the stage. So what I heard there in the how to create ownership, there's a lot about who. There's people that matter, and they're not just policymakers. There's a lot about the silos and the need for collaboration that gets in the way all the time. And then there is the metrics question. What's the goal? So thank you for that. I think those are all really important levers to get us to participate in these topics together. And so as we close out, and keep your eye on Lauren, because she will be waving a handkerchief as you hit the top of the hour in your answers. I want you to we'll start with you, Christine, and you can build on your challenge to this group. That's what I'd like you to end with. What can we do in this room to maintain the momentum for sustainability and resiliency in your space? What do you need us to do when we leave today?
Oh yeah, this is my favorite part. Because I hear all the time, oh, but those are one-time funds. What about when the money runs out? I love that question. Because guess what? It's not on the treasurer, it's not on the governor, it's not on the housing division, it's not on the legislature, it's not on Intermountain Healthcare, it's not on the resorts. It's actually on all of us to choose and recognize our role that we play in moving the needle for housing. And the business voice, by the way, I could use more of those voices. Your workers, our neighbors, our community members are the ones who are housing insecure right now. So I would love more of your voices at the table, because we're a table that has bias for action, right? And I think that's also important. So it's engaging, it's having bias for action, and it's setting a full table, not just with one voice, but with all the voices so that we can work together towards the solutions.
Thank you. Gentlemen?
Yeah, we think about, I was talking about who and who anchor institutions are, and I think we have a tendency as kind of large companies whose business is not directly in these spaces to have these bolt-on programs that are very good and doing good work, but they're not solving the systemic issue, right? I think part of the challenge of being an anchor organization in a community is realizing that it's more than just the sort of bolt-on programs that you do to support the community. It's about a way of doing business. So, it means thinking about who you're hiring and whether they're representative of the communities you serve, how much you're paying them, where you're buying stuff from. Does it come from here? Does it come from somewhere else? And how much energy, water you're consuming, how many harmful chemicals are in your supply chain. As a healthcare system, we've been really focused on the sustainability thing for a couple of years, and our sustainability guy talks to the group, all the supply chain leaders. I had no idea how many deeply toxic chemicals were in the couches that we bought. These aren't, not decisions not ways that we have traditionally made decisions, but I think that's the challenge. Think hard about the way you conduct business and how it affects the systemic issues that are driving these inequities that we're talking about.
Yeah, I'd have two comments on that. One is, first and foremost, always take a position of non-victim blaming. A lot of the victims in human trafficking, people say, oh, she can change that or he can change that anytime they want. They really can't. And so not blaming the victim is one thing you could take away and spread that culture throughout, your influence and in your organizations. And number two, when you're in your organizations, look and see what are you doing for the 3 H's? What are you doing for, affordable housing? What are you doing for healthcare? And what are you doing to combat human trafficking? And what is your organization and entity doing? And how can you partner and find out more about what you can do in that particular space?
Thank you. I'm just going to wrap up with one final comment as I thank our panelists. Thank you all. Please give them a round of applause for their expertise. And I want to thank Lauren and Impact Nevada for structuring today in this way. Talking about sustainability and the triple bottom line, you can often, I think, in my experience, remove the human element from that. And I appreciate that we've started with systems. Systems are people, folks. And you have started here with these three outstanding experts hearing a lot about humans and people. I work at an institution, the Gwynn Center, that prides itself on data-driven analysis. And I remind myself every day, as I did in the governor's office when we had the highest unemployment rate in the nation, and as I did when I was your state superintendent and I looked at test scores, behind every data point is a human. And so when we reduce humans to data, it is useful, as you go into the conversation about economic development. It can also be harmful. So my hope, after all my time in government and listening to these experts, I am even more convinced keeping the human element in this conversation of sustainability is terribly important. And so I thank this group for starting with us today. Senator, the floor is yours.
Well, excuse me. Thank you, Dale, and thank you for that closing statement. Because I'm a very data-driven person. the Gwen Center is a very data-driven organization, and I've used them as a resource. When I got into the legislature, I'm like, oh, I'm like a business guy, I'm energy guy, utility guy. This is going to be like, whew, good thing I don't have to deal with education and healthcare. And then I got put into finance, and then chairing finance and interim finance. And at the other side of every one of those dollars, on the other side of every one of those data points, is a human, is a Nevadan, and we literally are making life and death decisions. And it's very helpful to always keep that in your mind, but at the same time, you have to try to let the data on outcomes drive your decision making. And so it's very difficult, and I'm really glad that Dale brought that up. And I'm also, this is a great example of it, Dale coming from private sector to public sector to private sector, and how kind of those things overlap, and then how quickly we've gotten to the point, how quickly we've gotten to the nexus of this conversation, which is how these things intersect, how these things overlap, and how they are interrelated to one another. And so we got there a lot quicker than I thought we would, but I think that's a great panel to start with to help kind of lay that groundwork. So up next we have our next panel. Our next panel is going to be on building on our economic sustainability momentum, and that panel is going to be moderated by John Restrepo, a principal from RCG Economics, and we are going to dig into the economic aspects of sustainability momentum. So come on up.
Perfect. I'm sitting here. Well, I think the rest of my panelists abandoned me. Oh, well, I'll invite when you come. We have the great Mike Kazmersky, the even greater Bob Potts coming up, and always shy and demure Tina Quigley. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone. As I mentioned, Mike is President and CEO of EDON, Economic Development Authority of Western Nevada. Bob is my fellow economist from GoEd, and Tina, who we all know and love, is the President and CEO of the LVGEA. So first of all, it's kind of unusual to be up here with a series of, not only us up here, but a number of panels where we've had a sober adult discussion of the opportunities and challenges facing not only Southern Nevada, but Northern Nevada. The challenges are more here focused in Southern Nevada, but to me, I'm excited about it. Usually, I'm looked at as the buzzkill in the room, and have quickly get disinvited from parties and other polite company when I talk about some of these things. So I think it's good that we're looking at these things in a new way, where we're heading as a community, as a state, and we'll talk about this issue of Northern and Southern Nevada and those sorts of things. But what I'd like to do is kind of start with my first question to Bob, who, as I said, is sort of my mentor. And my first question to Bob is, what is your favorite economic development agency, EDON or LVGEA?
So I spent, 20 years living in Southern Nevada, and I spent about 7 years in Northern Nevada, right? That's where I used to.
So did you just answer the question? Is that what you said?
No, I'm taking a long road around this.
Okay, all right. Okay. All right, I just want to understand. I do want to have you guys, I'd like to do more of a open discussion and dialogue today, but I'd like to just kind of limit your responses, if you can, to 3 to 4 or 5 minutes. But I'd like to do, starting with Mike and then going to my right, is what do you see as a mission of EDON? What is the mission you see of each of your organizations? And then how do you guys collaborate and coordinate in those missions? Go ahead, Mike.
Well, our mission at any economic development organization is to create quality jobs. In our view, we focus on quality job creation through attracting great companies, retaining the companies we have, helping them grow, and then helping startups and entrepreneurs grow the new companies. So really, it's about quality job creation. And I like to say the economic development team is required. I mean, you've got to have government on board. You've got to have your all your nonprofit partners. You've got to have a great community to attract great companies too. And it's that synergy between the community involvement and the ultimate goal of job creation.
Gina?
Yeah, so ditto to what Mike just shared. And it's funny because I asked our board recently what their thoughts are. What is an economic development agency? What are we supposed to be doing? And there's a variety of answers right out there. Everybody's kind of got their own thoughts. Is it jobs, jobs, jobs? Is it community? And really, it's this ecosystem. It is jobs, jobs, jobs. But in order to be able to bring those jobs to a community, you've got to have the infrastructure and the social the social services that provide that quality of life to attract those jobs, 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 and workers. So it's this. It is truly an ecosystem and a balance.
I would just jump in and say quality jobs as you get people back to work is
Yes,
key.
not all jobs are.
You've got to have a living wage in order to enjoy life.
We'll get to that in a minute, because that's a really important part, Mike, that we need to bring. Go ahead. Bob.
Well, as Dale mentioned in the earlier panel, you know, the Governor's Office of Economic Development was really was made a cabinet-level position under the Sandoval administration, and that was back in 2011. It was all about, at that time, it's during the Great Recession, we were the poster child of the unemployment rate, and the whole point was to get people back to work, to create a structured economic development ecosystem that included the RDAs, that included, you know, the things that the state should be doing, whether it's on the policy side to deal with all the political things that we have to deal with, and to work as a real close, strategic and intentional economic development ecosystem across the state, okay? And it was all about getting people back to work and helping fixing the unemployment rate. Then the next level gets back to what Mike had just said. It's all about the quality of jobs. I think, you know, in the 10 years that I've been with GoEd, the story I keep telling everybody, you know, we work with companies all the time, and we think about specific industries, how we're diversifying, how we're trying to be really strategic in what we're doing. But you always have to look over the company and look at the people that staff it. That's where it always comes back to, and not just the people that staff it, but their families. And I think at the end of the day, that's what we're all about, so.
Well, so speaking of that, so we're attracting companies here in the state. You know, there's, you know, it's kind of an interesting thing to me. On the one hand, we say we're a business-friendly environment. Come to Nevada. We're not California. You know, you've heard that story. And so if we're such a business-friendly environment here, I'm putting my hat on. I'm not a libertarian economist by any stretch of the word, but I just want to say something about economists for a minute. There's nothing worse than an amateur economist except for a professional economist. They're the epitome of badness. But why do we need abatements? If we have already a business-friendly state and a tax-friendly state, why do we need abatements to attract companies here, Bob? And I'd like to hear you guys address that as well.
Well, so I think these guys are going to be able to give you a real solid answer, because the RDAs are the boots on the ground. They work with these companies at a very close personal level, and so they understand what that takes. The tax abatements, in order for our state to be competitive and to be able to attract the right companies in the right industries at the wages that actually lift the pond, right, that lift the level for workers, you have to be able to attract them, and abatements are part of that tool.
Gina?
So I want to make it really clear, because I think a lot of people don't understand the difference between an abatement and a tax credit. So there isn't this pot of money out there that the state is giving to companies to come and locate here in the form of credits. That's not happening. It is, you come here and some of the tax burden will be reduced on you for X number of years. And I think it's generally about 2 years. And we need those in order to stay competitive with other regions who have tax incentive programs, and generally they are more aggressive than ours. We've got, as I understand it, a more conservative tax abatement program, tax incentive program than others. Once the business, so people think, well, why do we need to attract businesses here with abatements? That's lost tax revenue. I think we could debate that is not lost tax revenue, because that business may choose to not locate here if we don't have that abatement and that incentive. I was just talking with our team today, and with the jobs that we have brought here over the last 10 years, we've brought in an additional LVGEA has helped companies relocate here, and those that we have helped bring here have brought in an additional $1.1 billion to the state in their tax contribution. So again, it's not a credit, it's an abatement, and it's not in perpetuity, it's for a tenured amount of time. So.
That's an important distinction. I just wanted you to say it. I'm glad you said it the way you did. It was perfect because a lot of folks are mistaken about what this is all about. Yeah. Go ahead, Mike, if you want to.
I would just add to Tina's comments, which were dead on. The biggest part of our abatements, and in the north, our recovery has been driven by advanced manufacturing, and obviously onshoring some things have been pretty important based on what happened during the pandemic. We want more of our product produced in the U.S., and we're a great state and a community to do that. We've been focused on that for 10 years and have brought in nearly 100 manufacturers. 38 other states don't tax manufacturing equipment. Let that sink in. 38 other states do not tax manufacturing equipment, and we do. So we don't abate that for some period of time, we're off the list. They're not even going to come look at us. So that abatement, and when you look at Tesla as a great example, everyone goes 1.4 billion. What a giveaway. I love to hear that because, now Tesla's 10-year period or period of abatements is running out, and Story County is going to be flowing into cash, and the state as well, because half of that supposed 1.4 billion was an abatement on their equipment. Pure and simple.
And as a result of you having a Tesla, it's brought on ancillary businesses and other activities, even local activities. So dry cleaners, grocery stores, banks, etc. There's that domino effect, or that, what you call it, the indirect
multiplier.
Yeah,
Multiplier.
The indirect multiplier that comes with it. So it's not even just about that direct project. It's got larger concentric circles.
And that project is a great example because they would not be here if we didn't abate those taxes. They'd have gone to Texas. Texas was neck and neck with us, and they gave them $200 million, or offered them $200 million of cash. We're not allowed to do that based on our Constitution, but we did abate, their manufacturing taxes for a period of time. So that makes us competitive. And as Tina said, oh, by the way, all those employees are paying taxes. All those suppliers and providers are paying taxes. All that other activity that occurs because of that company is paying taxes. So we come way out ahead by abating taxes.
So if we go back and we look at the math on this, the ROI on our tax abatements from an economic impact side is about $250 for every dollar abated. So.
Mic drop.
Boom.
Yeah. Well, that's important because a lot of folks just don't understand that, and they see things at the surface, or the media reports it kind of in an erroneous way, not on purpose. It's just the media folks sometimes don't understand the details of some of these nuances. But it's a really critical piece of this discussion of back to the resilience question. What do we need to do to become more resilient as an economy? And I want to say one thing. There is, in my mind, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, guys. There is a difference between economic diversification and economic development. That sometimes those terms get commingled. I'll give you an example. A number of years ago, probably 20 years ago, 15 to 20 years ago, we're all excited here in Southern Nevada because we were diversifying our economy into call centers. So we were replacing low-wage jobs in the resort industry with low-wage jobs at call centers. We thought we were very excited about that until those jobs got exported to Asia or became replaced by technology. And we'll talk about the automation thing in a minute. That's different than economic development, which speaks to the quality of jobs. This quality of the other companies you're attracting, the quality of the economic activity or business activity. So always think about economic development more than diversification. Diversification does not bring a whole hell of a lot of resilience. It diversifies whatever the hell that means, but it doesn't do much for you. So,
John, can I just, I know this.
You're going to jump in?
Yeah.
I thought you were not going to do that today.
I didn't say that. Okay, so Mike, I'm fairly new to economic development, but Mike Kazmierski has been kind of a mentor to me, so thank you very much, because he's been there for a while. He's done great things up in Northern Nevada. One of the things that you shared with me, I really love, and I share with audiences regularly, was that flow of money document.
Oh, yeah.
So the definition of an economy is like a bucket of money. So inside this bucket, money's kind of transacting, it's whirling around, it's going up, your daycare provider, your grocery store, your employer, dry cleaner, et cetera. It's whirling around in these services and products within your community. But the problem is that there's a hole in the bucket. And in Southern Nevada, we have a pretty big hole because every time you buy something that wasn't manufactured here within that bucket, the money is lost. It went to another community. And the fact that we don't grow anything here, we don't manufacture cars here, even this paper and pen, none of this came from here. So every time we buy that, it's drained out. Now, we've been very lucky to have this wonderful golden goose, or this spigot of money that the gaming and hospitality industry has provided us. It just flows right into this bucket. And it has it has been there for as long as we can remember. And we haven't ever really had to think too much about other spigots. But sometimes that gaming and hospitality spigot, it goes through boom and bust cycles. And when it does, our bucket starts to drain and we lose jobs. Maybe our friends and family lose jobs. They have to leave the market. It's very uncomfortable. So the role of the EDA is to try and bring in and diversify, bring in more spigots that diversify just that one spigot. And so we're working on that as much as we can, and advanced manufacturing is one of them. But the definition of a prosperous economy is one that is bringing in those other spigots, but that also we're seeing a slowly but surely increasing average wage rate within the region. And that's the definition of economic development. Did I do that right?
Excellent.
Okay.
Tina's a great student.
Yeah. You just
leader.
You started with economics and economic development, two different things, but I'm glad how you folded it all together.
I tried.
Okay. But no, Tina makes a good point. I bring this up to our business groups, but I do a lot of presentations every month to a variety of groups, and business groups particularly, and oftentimes the business groups are more conservative folks. And I always ask one question to them at the beginning: what are the job creators in the economy? And you usually get the entrepreneurs, businesses are the job creators. That sounds good. That's what Stephen Colbert calls truthy. It feels true. The real job creators are consumers with purchasing power. And that comes with incomes and wages and salaries and benefits, and not only for the new companies that are here, but what we don't like to talk about too much because it's the elephant in the room, so to speak, what are existing companies do to increase in wages in the community? So that comes into play as well. So that rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing. So we always have to think about what we're doing in terms of wages and incomes and spending power to move our economy forward and to make it more resilient. I do want to ask Tina and Mike something here too. It's just tied into going back to one of my original questions about economic strategies. They have to be, by the nature of the two different economies, how do you see, maybe there's a question for Bob as well, because he's dealing all over the state. What are the economic development strategies that make it different what we're doing down here in Southern Nevada versus what Mike is doing in the north in terms of two different economies, one state, and how do they differ, or how are they the same? And I'll give that to Bob for now.
So, I mentioned a little bit earlier, the RDAs are really our boots on the ground, and you guys are focused on the unique characteristics of your different regions. The Reno Sparks MSA was a very different place on October 10, 2010, wasn't it, Mike, than what it is now, right? That's when the paper came out and said, will Reno become the next Detroit of the West, right? And there were a lot of things that were set in motion where the stars kind of lined up, right? And so, there was a trick, the industrial center that was out there. Reno's got great quality of life and those sort of things. And then you bring cohesiveness where everybody's starting to work together with leadership that is very strategic about what they want to get done, and this is what you end up with 10 years later, right? So that's just an example of what really strategic economic development that has a whole diversification structure built into it, right? We as a state as a whole, we need to think about, okay, so what's going on with EDON, what's going on with LBGA, what's going on with the 6 other RDAs in the state. You look at Southern Nevada, 75% of the population and the jobs are down here, 20% are in the Reno Sparks MSA. The balance is in this huge geography, right? we just by definition are a diverse state. We're simultaneously both the most urban and rural state in the United States. We're the most mountainous state in the United States. We became a majority minority in the 2020 census. There's just a whole bunch of things that creates like this hybrid vigor if we get it done right, right? And so that's really our goal, is to figure out how do we get everybody to be the best at what they're doing for their regions that lifts it for everybody, considering our comparative advantage, our proximity to the 5th largest economy in the world. What's the difference between the Bay Area and the Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach? How do we tie in with Utah, Arizona? How are we thinking about how that all works together? What's the unique characteristics of our mining counties? What's the unique characteristics of the ag counties that we have? Thinking about all those things and then empowering them to succeed where they taking the whole piece of machinery and letting each one of the cogs be the best they can so the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. How's that?
Amazingly good for an economist.
Yeah.
Very articulate, very articulate. But what do you guys see? This is a question for both Tina and Mike. You touched on, what do you see, Tina, as the competitive advantages of Southern Nevada?
Well, first, so I don't know that first of all, I want to dispel. We talk so much about north-south issues, and admittedly, there are times and places to have those conversations. But when it comes to economic development, not so much. So Southern Nevada is, I think Brookings called some metropolitan area. They're like mega regions. Yeah, mega regions. So Southern Nevada is not really even associated with Northern Nevada as you refer to as an economic development region or a metropolitan area, mega region. We are more aligned and competitive with Southern Nevada and Phoenix. Southern California.
Right,
yeah,
right.
in Phoenix. Our geographical assets are very, very different than the geographical assets in Northern Nevada. And so it's very, very unique. Our workforce is going to be different. Our proximity, we have access to different ports. Ours, I-15 gives us a direct access to the ports of Long Beach and LA. I'm trying to think of other things, but we're going to be very different, and the types of markets that we're going after probably are going to be different as well. And yeah, we'll be capitalizing on different assets.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mike.
Well, the north, Tina mentioned mega regions. We're aligned with San Francisco. And if you made that drive north to south, and a lot of people don't realize, because I get calls all the time and say, well, I'm in Vegas, why don't I come by and say hi? It's like, okay, either get on an airplane or prepare for a 7 or 8 hour drive. Totally different. So as a state, we are very different. We work with different companies. We have different focuses. And there are many times when on the economic development front, someone calls us and we say, well, you're not a good fit for this region. Why don't you give, LBGEA a call? Or why don't you give, one of the other RDAs a call? And we do that often. In fact, we turn down now up in the Reno-Sparks area more people that call than we actually ask or work with. We turn people away. We say, you can't succeed here. Here are some other options. So as a state, working together is incredibly important, and I think what we've done up north can be replicated down here at some point. Diversification, obviously, is the key to economic development, in my view.
Can I build on that a little bit, John?
Yes, sir.
So I think what Mike is talking about is, so if you go back to the Great Recession, Reno-Sparks had to do something, right? They had to do something. They got very intentional, strategic about it. Southern Nevada was kind of forgiven for that because the Great Recession got over, leisure and hospitality, the headquarters are here. John and I, once taxable sales starts returning, everybody goes back to the way it was done before, right? And that's kind of what happened down here. It took a very long time to recover from the Great Recession, and in a matter of 2 months, we lost every job that we got because of the pandemic, shutting the economy down and bringing things back up. But the lesson was, I think a lesson has at some level been learned here, and we have a model in Northern Nevada that we can at some degree do in Southern Nevada as well. Thinking about proximity to these major urban areas, what makes Nevada unique is the gateway to the rest of the continental United States. whether you're in southern Nevada, whether you're in northern Nevada, and how are you going to take advantage of that and build on that when you have the opportunity to do that, right? So I'm sitting here thinking about, okay, in southern Nevada, if we build out the infrastructure, if we can start thinking about land, if we can figure out how to be really good with the water challenges that we have and the workforce and the housing and these other things that we have going, if everybody gets together and does the right things, I think that we can plagiarize what happened in northern Nevada and southern Nevada in many ways.
Right, as long as we understand one thing, that sometimes I think we forget there's a huge qualitative difference in the quality of I-80 and its access to markets across the country and the quality of I-15. I-80 is a much more direct link to the East Coast than I-15 is. So we just have to understand that. That's why understanding our competitive advantages and what we're good at and what we're not good at, or we're not as competitive at, we just got to understand those things and not kind of get lost in some of our own PR, so to speak, as I like to say. But I do have a question which always surprises me, and I don't fully understand. And this is really a Tina, Mike, and for all you guys, actually. We have such great opportunities in Southern Nevada. We are sitting next to the fifth largest economy in the world, California. We have some really strong quality, issues in terms of temperature, climate, and there's a variety of other things that are important to us. Why do so many companies jump over us, and Phoenix for that matter, go to Texas and California? Is it a matter of the size of their economy, the quality of their education system, their tax incentives? What do you guys see as the reason for that?
Well, I mean, I'm still new and still just starting to learn some about some of our competitor cities and or in states. Texas does, as I understand, have a more aggressive tax incentive and abatement and credit program, and that actually each of the municipalities themselves have the ability to set some of those tax incentive and those tax incentive programs. So they can even get very competitive amongst themselves.
Mike, what do you see? How do you see it from your side?
Well, we don't lose many projects, at least not until recently. Once we get a chance to work with them, we're pretty successful ultimately. Recently, we're losing them for two reasons: housing affordability, and Christine talked about our goal on that. I don't think anyone realizes how big the problem is. Housing is an incredibly large problem, not just here, pretty bad up north. Nationally, it's a gigantic issue, and companies can't get employees to move if they're not paying $30 an hour. So our goal on average wage for the companies we attract is $65,000 a year. You're not making $65,000, and you think about that in manufacturing, you got to pay someone minimum $30 an hour to get even close to that. We don't even talk to them, and yet they still can't afford to live in a place where the average wage, the median home price, is going at over $600,000. You can't find one to build. You can't find one to buy. You can't even rent now a one-bedroom for under $1,300, $1,400 if you can find one with 2% vacancy. So housing, and Christine talked about that, and the $500 million, and I love, Christine is amazingly positive. I will support her any way I can, but $500 million is nothing. Sounds like a lot? It builds 167 apartment units. 167, $500 million. The average cost per door in apartments in the Reno-Sparks area is $300,000. Our need as a community per year is 6,000 units. 5,000 to 6,000, we just had a study done. 500 million builds 167 of them. Now, you can leverage public money and do all this other stuff and maybe get that number up to 2,000. That's 1 year. When the clock starts over next year, that 500 million isn't going to be there. We got to go again. So we got to figure out the housing issue in this state, or our homeless is going to get even worse. We can imagine that. And all our youth is going to have to go somewhere else to live. So I rate that as really the most critical issue. And then workforce attraction. I mean, you got to have workforce, and then our school systems, needless to say, are not the best. And so we're trying to get robotics in every classroom. When we started this initiative 3 years ago, we had 10 classrooms in Washoe County with robotics training and programs. We're now up to about 25 to 30%, and we set a goal in the community of every school in Washoe County will have robotics programs and competitions. I think First Robotics has followed that and set that as a goal for the state. Those are the skills that will feed the jobs of the future, that will get someone paid enough to actually live in our region, and I think your prices are going up as well. So I would say, those two things cost us. Down here, the reason they jump over, incentives, Tina hit on that. I think we don't have shovel-ready project ground. The cost to get something up and running is pretty darn difficult. And back to the workforce.
Yeah,
education
I
system.
think he's right. Workforce, yeah. If we can't pump out the employees that they need, they're gonna have to go elsewhere.
Bob?
Well, I think it's kind of interesting because I thought about this, our economies, especially in northern Nevada, have outgrown the region. They just have. And I think the pandemic has kind of helped that. I mean, none of us knows yet for sure how much the whole teleworker thing has taken over, but I think that has an effect where there's workers that come from the Bay Area and Chicago and New York that make a lot of money, that they drive up the price of housing to the point that it's not reachable by locals. I don't know what degree that's happened yet, and I think that's all to be played out in the numbers as we move forward. But our economies have outgrown the region, so we have to think about how are we going to work together so that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts and bring some of these efficiencies back into it. There's just going to have to be some really hard choices made too about what are we going to do with the physical structure in the state. There's a whole host of things we got to think about here. So, but so it was all about creating jobs, right, during the Great Recession or getting people back to work in this recovery period that we went through now. Our focus now has to be what Mike was saying is all about really good jobs, really good high-paying jobs that actually create opportunities so that folks can afford to live in these regions.
That's such an important point because you guys have all alluded to it a little bit. I think Mike has mentioned, and so you, Bob, more than maybe Tina a little bit, but this whole issue, and it was mentioned earlier in a couple of the other panels. I think Senator Brooks mentioned it, and I believe Jan Jones mentioned it as well, and that is our tax structure. It is consumptive-based tax structure. It's based totally on the consumption, and here in Southern Nevada, it's based on the kindness of strangers. If they're feeling comfortable coming and visit and spending money, then our taxes do well. Bob hit the nail on the head. We have as soon as taxable sales start going up again down here, we have a tendency to get distracted by the latest shiny object, whatever that may be, of the day, and we forget some of these core fundamental things we need to do. So how do you guys see the political appetite, for that matter, of looking at our tax structure seriously by the powers that be? What are your interest groups, the folks you report to and you work with, your clients, your customers, your stakeholders, so to speak? What are they saying about the tax structure and what it needs to be done to fix it or adjust it or amend it or change it in any way? Or maybe they say, no, it's perfectly fine. Well, I don't want to pay taxes. I love Nevada because I don't have to pay any taxes or low taxes. How are you guys seeing the conversations going in your world, Mike?
Well, John brought me up here to basically stir this pot, so I will. Our tax structure's broke. We know it, and we don't have the spine to fix it. I mean, that's really the bottom line. We need to do something different. We're doing this.
Must be a Republican out there.
There's not very many, probably. Elon Musk is a new one, so good luck with that. We, as a state, have a tax structure that was built on 100 years ago when we didn't have manufacturing, which is why we're one of 38 states that still taxes it. And we didn't have the need for all these services to our citizens. So we just kind of went, the good old days, and we haven't changed the structure. We had a chance. I worked with, several legislators to get the reset upon sale on the property taxes piece through the legislature 4 years ago, which it got through bipartisan. This last legislature wouldn't even have it heard and give the voters a chance to say, okay, when my house sells, the next person should pay taxes based on what the house was worth. Only state in the nation that doesn't do that. If we had done that 10 years ago, we would not have a tax problem right now. And again, we just bumped the can down the road another 5 years. So the absolute inability for our elected officials, as wonderful as they are and as much as we love them, to even associate in any way with the word tax. And, we've managed to do a few things on the edges, nip around the edges. We've never taken on the whole tamale, and as a state, until we do that, we will be broke.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no,
You
hard
don't
pass.
want to, you don't want to answer?
I'm just gonna say ditto, but yeah, don't put me down as ditto on the official recording. I'm still learning, about my board and their
Oh,
positions.
Come on, Tina, come on. All right. Tina said more taxes, okay. And an income tax too.
So I always think it's funny because you asked the question a while ago about tax abatements, right? And every time I look at my property tax bill, there it says abatement. Anybody that's a homeowner in this state is getting a tax abatement. That's the way it's set right now. So, so when we talk about tax incentives that, for economic development, property taxes isn't one of those, right? That's what the locals got to have, right? That's what builds their streets and their water systems, sewer systems, and everything else. And we're really hobbling on that front that Mike talked about. We're really hobbling our locals on being able to keep up the streets and the infrastructure and what they need to keep their cities modern and working right.
Let me drill down a little bit and get really kind of nerdy on the economic side of things. There's a lot of things happening right now in the world, obviously. Who would have thought we'd almost have another war in Europe, My recently departed dad, he's 97 years old, just passed away recently, was totally shocked that what he was seeing in Ukraine on TV was the kind of stuff he saw as a serviceman in World War II. He just couldn't believe it. So we have that going on. We have, the whole issue of inflation, a lot of liquidity in the system. We're trying to control inflation is getting out of hand. We have maybe new variants of the pandemic, of the COVID coming back again. And we have the issue of labor shortages because a lot of people are my age group and, baby boomers retired didn't come back. And so, and then we have the, shutdowns in China. So we have these supply chain issues. So how do you see all these things evolving over the next year or so? And how do we as Nevadans try and influence that to kind of limit the impacts on us if we can at all? Or do we just write it out and let the powers that be kind of handle it? Or how do you see this all unfolding over the next 12 to 24 months? And then the stock market just took a hit again today. And so we got a lot of stuff. And how do we deal with all these things in the context of this economy when it's so dependent on the health of the world economy in many ways because of our, particularly down here in southern Nevada, but also in northern Nevada? How do you guys see this thing evolving over the next year or two?
So I'll go first, and I don't know I'm really gonna address your question, but, so these things are going to continue to happen. There are gonna be world events constantly. There's gonna be local events, national events, et cetera. I wanna kind of go back to some of the things that Jan Jones said and take it more locally. So these external events are going to constantly happen. What we've got to do here in Southern Nevada is first have a strong strategic plan related to how we are going to be resilient here in Southern Nevada in diversifying and growing our economy. And starting to, maybe we have never truly, I don't know that we have ever truly had like a 10-year strategic plan for the entire community. We've got at LVGEA 3-year plans, maybe 5-year plans, but as a community have we had a true 10-year plan? And I do that only because I was talking with Arizona Phoenix not too long ago, and they were talking about the fact that they have a what do we want to look like in 10 years plan. And when you have that plan in place and you continue to have all the oars rowing in that direction, even though there are these external events that are happening in our economy, as long as and I'm simplifying things here, John, I know, but if we have that goal that we're heading towards, we accept the things that are going on, but we will still stay focused on where we're trying to head, that big, hairy, audacious goal as it is for our community. So I didn't.
You're good.
All right.
You're good.
Okay.
I would start by saying, hang on to your hats. It's going to get bad. You can't deal with 8% inflation and expect families and businesses to increase their travel and to come to Vegas and to party, other than maybe a few bachelor parties. When an economy depends on a lot of discretionary spending and a likely recession is looming, some people would say we're probably into it already, it's going to be bad. What does that mean to all of us with jobs? There'll be job losses, there'll be home losses, there'll be issues, in large part because down here, the diversification doesn't allow for some moderation of that. Up north, we have gaming and tourism as well. It's gone from 25% of our economy to 5, 6, 7, 8%. So if they take a 50% hit, we're still doing fine. We're still manufacturing. We still have logistics, distribution, and a lot of that's down here as well. But the biggest thing we have is technology growth. And those are the jobs that'll be here in the next 10 years. If you read the Brookings report, 40% of the jobs that exist now will be gone in 10 years, replaced by automation. John mentioned automation, AI, robotics, gone. What are we doing with those employees that are going to look for another job? If we can upskill them, bring in the right jobs, and diversify the state, not just down here, but the state, these storms will be weathered a lot easier. So in my view, it's going to be bad. There's going to be a recession, and Vegas is going to go in the tank, as it always does when discretionary spending dries up.
Mike, please tell us how you really feel about Las Vegas. And let me push back on Mike a little bit. Reno is not immune to a recession. Advanced manufacturing also depends on the cost of raw materials, also depends on 8.3% inflation, also depends on consumers buying the advanced manufacturing products and businesses buying manufacturing products. So it's a whole ecosystem of growth. Yes, Southern Nevada is vulnerable, very vulnerable because of our discretionary spend economy. But all states are vulnerable right now based on their economies because we have a world economy in terms of global supply chains and manufacturing and all these sorts of things. So sooner or later, Mike, you'll join us in this hellscape you just described for Las Vegas.
We'll take on the thunderstorm as opposed to the hurricane.
Okay, all right. Oh, good. I'm glad you made a distinction without a difference. Go ahead, Rob.
I'm not quite the doomsdayer that Mike is. I think it's going to get soft, and I think there's a good chance there's going to be a downturn. And when you have economies like Southern Nevada, where it is very pro-cyclical, you know, and we always have higher highs and lower lows than the nation does, and other states have, and that risk still exists. I think there's, as far as the whole diversification thing, I think there's they want to talk to you. Oh my gosh. I think that there's some great things that have happened down here in Southern Nevada that were pandemic induced, okay? The new job numbers came out this morning, and so I think just what I could read on my phone, we're still down about 5,000. We're below 5,000 jobs below pre-pandemic highs. Okay, but if you look under the hood of that, we're still down 34,000 leisure and hospitality jobs, but we're up 20,000 transportation, distribution, warehousing jobs, and that's all happening down here. There's a fundamental shift because, you know, the pie stayed the same size, right? We're about back to pre-pandemic employment levels, but these pie slices are changing. And in part, they're changing because we went through this whole goods purchase effort, right? Because everybody was buying online from Amazon and everything else. We got hurt on the service side because this tends to be a real service-based economy. So I think that there's some dynamics that are happening there, and Southern Nevada's starting to win. If I go back to the 2005-ish or so, you look at the number of logistics and operations jobs in Northern Nevada, they were growing at about the same rate. The leisure and hospitality jobs were falling down, so there's this replacement. But with that replacement, and as those workers transfer, and they don't have to buy a house, they own a house, so, you know, kids are in a school, they have a neighbor, right? So you don't have to worry about those kind of costs. If we can get them retrained and whatever into these kind of industries like this, that actually pay better and have more opportunity. And then you think about where logistics and operations, warehousing, then you start get light manufacturing, you get assembly manufacturing. Assembly manufacturing turns into more advanced manufacturing. You start bringing in technology, and then you start bringing research and development in, and you start having an ecosystem that happened in Northern Nevada, and I see that happening down here if we're really smart and think about how we're going to build on this natural undertow that's already going on that was pandemic induced. It's so much easier to row with the current that's under us than to row across it or against it. So I think there's some opportunities here. Now, there are these big risks that John's talked about, right? These geopolitical events. You know, 20% of the wheat in the world is grown between Russia and Ukraine. That's a big deal, and wheat and food are pretty low on Maslow's hierarchy. We got to think about those kind of things, and we're all tied together. That the pandemic made pretty clear, right? The whole inflation thing, you got to go back to your basic micro class, right? Where it's supply and demand, it's price and quantity, right? And so when all of a sudden you have arguably $44 billion flow into the state of Nevada in some sort of stimulus package, and nobody's going to argue that it wasn't necessary, that it kept business afloat and everything else. that's the equivalent of a quarter of our annual GDP. Well, the definition, the textbook definition of GDP is the gross total value of all goods and services produced. And so you have to say, okay, well, we didn't fully produce because of those dollars, so all that money came in and it helped us buy a whole bunch of stuff, right? And pretty soon you have these supply chain issues where it can't keep up with the amount of demand that's out there for these goods, right? So the prices go up and you have all this inflation. It's just a natural evolution, right? And so the Fed's trying to one of the other ways it happens is you make money cheap. You keep the interest rates low. That's how you keep things from really going sideways in a depression or a recession, right? And so the Fed is taking these steps to kind of tap the interest rates back up without tipping us into a recession. My hope is, they have been riding an amazingly tight balance line between keeping the economy going when we had to have all these close downs and everything else, and now that they're all back and thinking about more variants coming along, man, it's a tough balance because there's this inextricable inverse correlation between the health situation and the economic situation. So, it could really go sideways. I give it a higher probability that it's going to go flat, and these highly procyclical economies it's going to be softer, but not.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate on that. I think the Fed, and not to get into too much nerdy, we had basically a V-style recovery here in Nevada and in the U.S. with the pandemic because of all the stimulus that got put into it. The thing that the Feds were trying to avoid in the Biden administration and the Trump administration is to have a long, extended recovery that we saw in the Great Recession, 10 years to recover all the jobs we lost in the Great Recession because we didn't act fast enough and strong enough at that time. So that there was this lesson to be learned, but it did get out of whack, so to speak, on the inflation by pumping so much liquidity in the system. But I want to touch on, and we've talked about these already, but I want to kind of delve into them a little bit as we kind of wrap this up. The kind of everyone's favorite topics beyond the Johnny Depp, Amber Heard trial, which I'm totally addicted to. I watch every day. But anyway, it gives me ideas for presentations and things. Land, three things: land, water, and automation, and how all those three items affect your economic development strategies and your target industries. Be honestly, I don't think sometimes here in Southern Nevada we pay as much attention as we should on the land issue. We're very cognizant of the water issue, particularly now that we have a new tourist amenity with these barrels in Lake Mead floating to the top. So we have another thing for tourists to do when they come here. But how are these three issues of land scarcity, water, the drought, and automation affecting or maybe causing you guys to revisit your target industries?
Yeah, bingo, John. So these issues, even though I know that we've kind of subtly known about them, they've really surfaced as being very loud issues just in the past few months. And, candidly, our SEDS document, our economic development strategy plan, does not really thoroughly address those. There are some it's a document like this, of which there are maybe a few paragraphs that talk about the scarcity, looming scarcity of water and land. You're the one, you have taught me that we've got about 8 years left of developable employment land in our inventory. And that's if we were to continue growing at the rate that we've been growing, we've got about 8 years left of supply of land for employment purposes. Water Authority will tell you that if we were to continue consuming at the rate that we're consuming, we have about 4 to 5 years left of water before we need to dip into reserves. Now, that is where their conservation plan comes in. If we can get down from 116 gallons per day per capita down to 86 gallons per day per capita, then we've got a very, very sustainable water plan. And we are recognized globally for having one of the most responsible water security plans. So I know we're in good hands, but those are issues that, you're right, do affect the types of target industries that we have traditionally gone after, and now what we need to go after. In fact, we get requests for information from companies who are looking to relocate, and they'll send out RFIs to different cities asking, for what opportunities do you have in your community, and increasingly we are not responding to any RFIs if it looks like it's going to be a high water user. So that means that sometimes there is some manufacturing in there, like a bottling plant, a soup plant, anything that consumes our water, and then that water is taken outside of our community. If it's not water that's going to go back into Lake Mead, that's a concern, and it does change the strategy.
Yeah, and the hardest one of all of those three,
Workforce is the other one.
yeah, the workforce,
Yeah.
is the issue of automation, because you don't know the predictability of how companies will move where they look like great high-paying jobs, they're $30 an hour.
Yeah.
The next thing you know, 5 years from now, they replace half the workforce with robotics.
$15 an hour,
Guess
yeah.
what? Robots don't complain to the HR department, right? And so there's that issue too, which is the hardest thing. The hardest thing to track is the changes in technology. But go ahead, Mike, and what's your thoughts?
Well, if you focus on those three, we don't have a water problem up north. I know it's hard to believe. Probably one of the most water-blessed communities in the West. We could literally triple in size and not have a water issue. We still have green grass everywhere. Our water bills are too low. We don't take it seriously, although on the economic development front, any high water user we tell to go away. It's not the place for high water users. They can go other parts of the country, which helps us. So water's not an issue up north. We've got several reservoirs and Truckee rivers and all. And even in the Great Drought, we only used our reserve once in the last 15 years, and we've since doubled our reserve. So water aside, the land is a problem. And John and his team did a great report for us. We're running out of land. 86% or 85% of the state's owned by the feds. We need a chunk of that in order to continue to grow in an efficient and smart way. So we got a lands bill to address some of that. Otherwise, we become sprawl, and we jump over the mountains and develop in other places. So land is a very big issue, as it is down here, and I think our legislators, certainly at the national level, are aware of that and are working it. Automation is the part that scares me the most, because the kind of workforce we need to be successful and live in this state needs to be educated. And we are one of the we invest least in our kids. We don't support education funding. I mean, that reset upon sale would have helped education funding, it would have helped a lot of things. We don't value how important it is to educate the workforce of the future now. And so until we figure that one out, and not at the bottom of the barrel, literally, of educating our kids, we are going to fight and fight and fight to get companies in here. And what they're going to do is say, well, you guys don't have talent. They're going to try and import talent. The talent can't afford to be imported, so they won't come here. And it's going to force a statewide pullback of some magnitude. So that, to me, in our view, is the top issue for the state, educating the future workforce. If we do that, talent comes. If we do that, a lot of smart things follow. And we're just not doing it.
Thank you. Thank you. Bob?
Yeah, so the big three, workforce, water, and so I think that the workforce and the automation are tied together. So one of the things we've been looking at a lot is, is another one-star indicator that I think is really helpful is the labor force participation rate, right? We are at incredibly low levels right now in the labor force participation rate. It's below 60%, so it's the size of your labor force divided by the working age population, 16 and older population, right? And that's, we're at one of the lowest states of any state. And there's a number of reasons, and it often happens that when you go through a downturn in the economy with labor market churn and a whole host of things like that. Part of it has to do with childcare and the low wages that's part of childcare. So, these are acute issues that we need to think about and we need to work on. We need to figure out how we're going to support that and get that going. Another big part of it is a lot of folks, John mentioned it earlier, in the baby boom generation, seen this as a chance to exit left. And so they did. So they fell out. And you've got a lot more baby boomers going out than Gen Zers coming in, and the whole level of experience and everything else that goes on. My concern is down the road, this whole, they're calling it a Sansdemic, right? So if you go back to, since 1970, the birth rate has been about 2.1%. That is not sustainable. We're going to a place where there's going to be more work than workers. And so I think automation and technology is going to play a critical role to increase the productivity per person. So I think it's going to play an incredible role in the states or the regions that get in front of this. that educate their folks to be able to drive technology, to drive automation, are going to be the winners at the end of the day, because that's the direction we're going. If we're going to have the same level of productivity that we have now to support the population that's retiring and everything else, we're going to have to figure out how to leverage automation.
Thank you. What I'd like to do is start wrapping up a little bit. We still got about around 10 minutes, I guess, for questions if you want to ask some questions. But I do want to say one thing, and this is to my friends in the environmental community who are sort of opposed to economic growth, economic development, diversification, because it may lead to sprawl or it may lead to other kind of things that may be unpleasant. And I think I'm coming at this point from a kind of a radical centrist economist. And what I mean by this is that if you look around the country and look at the metro areas around the country, the small metros, the larger metros, you cannot have healthy environment, natural environment, without a healthy economy. They're all related. You have to have balanced growth. You have to have smart growth, whatever the euphemism is today. But you cannot have a healthy environment, a natural environment, without a healthy economy, with workers that are paid well, that have good jobs, that can afford, where the taxes are generated to help protect the environment. So keep in mind, there's always this balance between economic growth, economic development, and protection of the environment. With that said, I'd like to open it up for questions. I can't see very well. Does anyone have any questions for our illustrious panel? No one wants to talk about cap rates, capitalization rates, or any kind? Come on, guys. No? You bored? You want us off the stage? Ready for a break, yeah. Can you guys, you ready for a break, huh? I know, I don't blame you. Okay, that's it. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Thank you for the panel. Thank you, guys. That was great. Thank you. Perfect.
Thank you, John, and thank you to that panel. That was a lot of fun. I don't know. I mean, this is man. I am surrounded by a bunch of nerds. I am loving it. Yeah, I am in my element. But I think that a lot of really important issues were brought up, and I just wanted to kind of circle back on some of those. We talked about BLM land or federal controlled land, and what a huge issue that is. Bigger for our state than any other state in the United States. We talk about Texas. Well, Texas doesn't really have to deal with BLM. And when we talk about some of these other states, none of them have to deal with it in the way that we do. And that really limits a lot of our potentials in the state. But it also creates an opportunity. Almost all of the renewable energy that's been developed in the state of Nevada has been developed on BLM land. It's turned federal land into taxable land with property taxes, sales and use taxes. Some are abated, but going straight into the local economies. And that brings me to, since we're talking about momentum, not that that was depressing or anything, but since we're talking about momentum, that brought up an example where every single issue that we talked about just now on this panel all are encapsulated in one thing, and it's a thing that I work on every day for the last 22 years. It is renewable energy. Renewable energy development in the state of Nevada creates a product that we currently import. $12 billion a year in our of that GDP is imported fossil fuel energy. A lot of that is transportation fuel and electricity. Now, we could make all of that here using BLM land that we've turned into taxable land and taxable income, and it uses an abatement that was passed by a legislature and a governor years ago that creates a job that is a local job that pays 170% of statewide average hourly wage. That's about $80,000 a year for the average worker on that project. And so there are ways. That is something we've done great, and a lot of the people in this room are responsible for it, and it is a way that we can capitalize upon some existing policies to address all the issues that were just brought up to create momentum. So with that, take that momentum, take that energy, and go get yourself a cup of coffee, and come back in 10 minutes, and a few of my friends are here. I have Assemblywoman Considine, Senator Harris. That's 10 minutes real people time, not legislative time, all right? All right, let's get a cup of coffee, and I'll see you back up here in 10, and we'll kick off the environmental sustainability panel.